Hey guys, tonight we are slipping quietly into the earliest hours along the banks of the Nile, when the air is still cool enough to make you draw your linen shawl tighter across your shoulders, and the world smells faintly of wet reeds, clay, and the smoke of fires that never really die out in this landscape. The river is more than a body of water here. It is the breath of Egypt itself, and in these first minutes before the sun's red edge cracks the horizon, you hear it lapping gently against the banks like a heartbeat muffled by sleep. Imagine you are there, eyes still sticky from the kind of restless night that comes when your bed is little more than a woven mat, and the mosquitoes circle endlessly, high-pitched and smug, as though they own the place. You stir anyway, because dawn in ancient Egypt is not a suggestion, it is an order. The fields will not till themselves, the quarries will not yield their stone, and the temples will not sweep themselves clean. And if you think you could just hit snooze on this life, you probably wouldn't survive past the first week here. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, go ahead and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I always love picturing the little web of listeners scattered across the world, connected through this quiet ritual of stories. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day begins with the Nile painted in pale shades of rose and lavender, and you hear the creak of wooden doors as villagers step out into the dust. Men in simple kilts, bare-chested, with sandals already in hand, shuffle toward the fields, while women crouch near grinding stones, shoulders rolling in steady circles as they crush last night's grain into flour. You smell it. The nutty, earthy scent of emmer wheat, heavy and wholesome, mingling with the tang of smoke from clay ovens. If you had to pinpoint a smell that defined Egypt more than the lotus blossom or incense, it would be that smell. Warm bread mingling with damp soil. And yes, you might be thinking that ancient people ate strange or even repulsive things, but honestly, this part is cozy. Nothing like the aroma of baking bread at sunrise to make you feel human. Whether in a mudbrick village 4,000 years ago, or your kitchen now with a temperamental toaster. You shuffle down the packed earth lane, eyes half closed, ears filled with the low chatter of neighbors exchanging greetings that sound like yawns wrapped in politeness. Chickens scatter around your ankles, thin and scrappy, their feathers mottled, and their clucks indignant as if they too had been rudely awakened. A stray dog noses at a basket left too close to the door, searching for crumbs. And somewhere, always somewhere, a baby is wailing. That's the constant background chorus of humanity. Bread baking, dogs sniffing, babies wailing. Eternal. Your stomach growls, and you realize how much the Egyptians built their world around this time of day. The first meal isn't elaborate. It's practical, the spark before the grind. But in its simplicity, it tells you everything about their lives, their values, their ingenuity. It isn't just about eating. It's about gearing up to survive, and perhaps to find some small pleasure before hours bent under the sun. Now here's where it gets interesting. The bread you're smelling is not like the fluffy white slices you might toast at home. Egyptian bread was dense, coarse, often gritty, because the stone grinding left flecks of sand in the flour. Archaeologists have literally found that ancient teeth were worn down smooth, not from candy or soda, but from chewing bread that was basically half sandpaper. Imagine chomping into a fresh slice, knowing it's doubling as dental exfoliation. And yet, this bread was the staff of life. Made from emmer wheat or barley, it was baked in dome-shaped clay ovens, shaped into flat loaves, or sometimes molded into little cones that look like they belong more in a fairy tale bakery than a real kitchen. What you're hearing now, carried on the dawn breeze, is the crackle of ovens heating, the hiss as dough slaps against hot clay walls, and the occasional grunt of a baker who has been awake since long before you. And this is where you notice that the ovens are not just private affairs tucked in households. They are community hubs. Neighbors bring their dough, shaped and ready, and pay a fee or simply help each other out. The ovens are like ancient Egyptian gossip centers, where the women might trade murmurs about whose husband has been lazy in the fields, or whose child ate too many dates and ruined his stomach. Imagine social media, but with flour in your hair and ash on your cheeks. Here's the thing historians still argue about. Was bread more of a universal equalizer, the food shared by all classes, or did its form and preparation draw clear social lines? Some argue that everyone, from peasant to pharaoh, ate bread daily, though the quality varied wildly. Others point out that nobles likely had softer, whiter bread sifted to remove grit, while workers made do with whatever the grindstone gave them. The debate lingers, like the smell of burnt crust. Still, in this moment, as dawn turns to gold and you take your first tentative bite, you realize bread is not just food. It is a promise that you will carry energy into the day. Chewy, heavy, and perhaps a bit too crunchy with all that sand, but undeniably sustaining. Your jaw works harder than you'd like, but your belly warms. There is something almost musical about the way the morning unfolds here. From the bread maker's rhythmic grinding to the muffled splash of fishermen casting nets in the river, every sound is part of the dawn orchestra. Picture yourself standing near the Nile's edge, the papyrus stalks whispering as a breeze slides through them. In the distance, you see the silhouettes of pyramids, not as crumbling ruins, but as living, geometric mountains, sharp against the sky. The sight steals your breath, even if you've seen it 1,000 times before. It's the kind of sight that makes you straighten your shoulders and sigh, because, well, what else can you do when your entire horizon is dominated by human ambition baked in stone? And yes, this early in the morning, you might also catch an odd detail. A few villagers swiping a smear of clay onto their eyelids. Not for fashion, though it does look striking in the half-light, but for protection. That's coal, the black eyeliner, made partly from ground galena, a mineral thought to ward off infection and the sun's glare. Imagine facing your 12-hour day in a quarry without sunglasses, but with fabulous smoky eyes. You have to respect the practicality, and while it isn't exactly breakfast, it's part of the morning ritual, as essential as bread or beer. As the sun rises higher, the color of the Nile deepens from lavender to shimmering blue, and the insects retreat into the reeds. Farmers are already trudging with their hoes slung over their shoulders, while children trail behind carrying water jars that look far too heavy for their tiny frames. You hear the slap of sandals against dust and the occasional bark of orders as overseers hurry everyone along. Breakfast must be eaten quickly here. Leisure is not on the menu. But within those hurried bites is an intimacy you wouldn't expect. Families crouch together on reed mats, sharing from the same loaf, tearing off hunks with their fingers, dipping them in whatever small dishes they can muster. A smear of lentil paste, a few olives, maybe a drizzle of date syrup if fortune has smiled, and all around. The smells mingle. The earthy bread, the slightly sour tang of beer being poured into jars, the sharp bite of onions being peeled for later. Your senses are overwhelmed, and you realize that morning in Egypt is not a quiet, solitary moment, but a communal storm of smells, tastes, sounds, and textures. It is the hum of humanity waking up. Now pause with me here, because there's a curious little twist. In some graves, archaeologists have found loaves of bread placed beside the deceased, meant to nourish them in the afterlife. That means, in a way, breakfast wasn't just for surviving today, it was for eternity. Imagine loving your bread so much that you insist on taking it with you beyond death. And honestly, can you blame them? You sit back for a moment, wipe your hands against your linen kilt, and glance toward the horizon. The sun is fully up now, hot even in its youth, promising a day that will test every sinew of your body. But you've had your bite, your chew, your grounding taste of bread. That, more than anything, is what gives you the courage to rise and step into the endless rhythm of this civilization that endures for millennia. The ovens have been smoking for hours now, and by the time you stumble out into the dusty lane, the smell is no longer just a hint drifting on the breeze. It's a wall of fragrance that nearly knocks you back. Imagine standing close enough to one of those clay domes that the heat licks at your skin, while inside, dough clings to the oven's curved walls like golden moons pressed against a fiery sky. The air is thick with the mingling scents of roasted grain, ash, and sweat from bakers whose tunics stick to their backs in the rising heat. This is not just bread anymore. This is breakfast being born in real time, a ritual carried out with hands that have done the same motion every morning for years, maybe decades, maybe even across generations. You draw closer, squinting through the haze, and watch as a baker leans into the dome with a long paddle. He pulls free a loaf so hot it steams visibly in the cool morning air, steam curling upward like incense. The crust is thick, charred at the edges, crackling as it cools. And beneath that hardened armor lies a chewy interior, dense with the body of emmer wheat. He sets it on a flat reed tray, where other loaves pile high like bricks waiting to build a wall, each one slightly misshapen, none perfectly uniform. You know instinctively this is food meant to be eaten immediately, not admired. The crackling sound itself feels like a kind of music, an applause of grain for surviving the fire. You bite into one loaf, tearing at the crust with more effort than you expected. It's heavy, chewy, and if you're being honest, not exactly soft. And yet, after the first bite, you feel a strange satisfaction. The bread fights back, makes you work for it, and in return, fills your stomach with weight and warmth. You look at the bakers and realize they are as much craftsmen as any sculptor chipping stone for a statue. Their art is humble but essential. Without them, fields don't get plowed, temples don't get cleaned, pyramids don't rise. Every pyramid you've ever marveled at was built on the backbone of loaves pulled from ovens just like this. There is a rhythm to the baking, a choreography that feels older than the pyramids themselves. A woman kneels at the grinding stone, pushing back and forth with her arms, her muscles tight with repetition. The grinding stone sings in low tones, grating grain into flour, while her child beside her gathers husks to feed the animals. Just beyond, another woman shapes the flour into small discs, her fingers coated in dust, her face streaked with ash. Together they form a chain, a sequence of motions that repeats endlessly across the land. You notice how quick the hands are, how instinctive, how the bread seems to flow from them as naturally as the Nile itself. And here's a curious thought. You can still find carbonized loaves of bread preserved in tombs, blackened but intact, shaped just as they were in life. Some even still bear the impression of a baker's hand or a woven basket pattern. It's haunting, almost, as if you can see the moment they were baked and placed in someone's home, or in someone's afterlife pantry, and realize that human touch carries across thousands of years. And to think you are holding a similar loaf now, feeling the same rough surface, chewing the same sandy grit. The taste of Egypt hasn't changed. But if you think all bread was equal, you'd be wrong. Watch closer. Some loaves are tall, almost conical, baked in molds that give them a distinctive pointed top. These are not for the average laborer. They are richer, made with better flour, baked with more care, and destined for tables where linen cloths are spread and cups of beer sparkle in the sunlight. And this is where arguments begin among scholars. Some insist these fancy breads were only for the wealthy, set aside for nobles and priests who could afford the better grind. Others suggest that even common people might save a little flour for festival days, shaping bread into special cones as a kind of treat, a brief moment of celebration before returning to the coarse, sandy stuff of daily life. You can almost hear the debates in a lecture hall somewhere far from here, as though scholars are still sniffing the air of this bakery, trying to decide who got which loaf. The truth may lie somewhere between. You glance again at the piles of bread and notice the difference is not so much in whether someone eats bread, it's in the quality of the bite. For you now, the loaf in your hand is dense, dark, maybe a little bitter. For the nobleman across town, his bread might be lighter, sifted, easier on the teeth. But both of you, peasant and noble alike, will taste bread before the sun climbs too high. Bread is Egypt's democracy, flawed, uneven, but shared. Now, if you lean closer still, you'll notice something odd. A few bakers are slipping herbs into the dough, small sprigs of coriander or fenugreek, seeds sprinkled across the top like tiny constellations. It adds a sharp fragrance, an extra spark of flavor that stands out against the plain wheat. It's a reminder that even within the grind of necessity, there is room for invention, for artistry, for a flash of delight that makes the morning more than just survival. Picture biting into one of these loaves and finding a burst of spice on your tongue. A tiny rebellion against monotony. This is breakfast with personality. You also see a boy crouch nearby, carefully fanning the coals with a woven fan, sweat dripping down his forehead. His arms ache, but he doesn't dare stop, because if the heat falters, the bread will fall flat. Behind him, a dog lurks, tail wagging, eyes fixed on the trays. The boy throws a pebble, half-hearted, but the dog only darts back a step, patient in its hunger. Even animals know the value of bread. They wait, as though the gods themselves might drop a crust for them. As you chew another mouthful, you can't help but think about the wear on your teeth. Already you feel the grains grinding in your molars, the crunch of something that is not entirely flour. And you remember, this is how the skeletons were found, jaws worn down flat by decades of eating this very bread. Ancient dentists would not have been impressed by the work of these grindstones. And yet, no one here is complaining. Bread keeps you alive, and in the calculus of survival, smooth teeth are a small price to pay. The sun rises higher, the ovens roar louder, and the trays pile higher with steaming loaves. Families arrive, their reed baskets tucked under arms, exchanging small coins or handfuls of barley as payment. The bakers hand over loaves still so hot they sting your fingers, and people hurry away, clutching their breakfast as if it were treasure. And in a sense, it is. This is gold in its most edible form, the alchemy of flour and fire turning effort into sustenance. And maybe that's why bread appears so often in their prayers, their offerings, their rituals. In temples, priests place loaves before the statues of gods, believing that divine figures too require breakfast to keep the world turning. And in tombs, loaves are piled beside the dead, stacked carefully as if to say, "Here, even in eternity, may you never hunger." You glance around this bakery, its smoke rising into the sky, and you realize this is not just an earthly workshop. It is part of a cosmic chain. By now, your stomach is warm and full, the bread heavy inside you, anchoring you to the earth. The chatter of the bakers continues, the rhythm of work unbroken, and outside the oven circle, the day itself has begun to blaze. Farmers head for the fields, baskets of bread tucked under arms, already tearing off chunks as they walk. Children chew noisily, giggling as crumbs scatter across their tunics. And in the distance you hear the creak of boats sliding across the Nile, the workers there clutching their own loaves, ready for whatever labor awaits. The first meal has been eaten. The bread, humble and flawed, has done its work. It will sustain bodies, fuel ambition, and, in some ways, preserve memory itself. For when you think of Egypt, of its monuments, its temples, its endless sand, you will think too of this bread, steaming in the dawn, its scent forever curling through time. The bread is still warm in your belly when you notice something else passing from hand to hand in the bustling streets, sloshing softly in tall jars, sealed with clumps of straw and sticky resin. The smell hits you before the sight, a sweet sour, tang, earthy and yeasty, with an undertone that makes you raise an eyebrow. This is not water, it is beer, though not the crisp, golden kind you picture in a frosted mug with condensation sliding down the side. No, this is Egyptian beer, breakfast beer, and it is thick enough to chew, closer to porridge than the liquid you know today. And yes, it is absolutely the morning drink of choice for farmers trudging into the fields, labourers heaving stone blocks, even children taking their first sips before heading to chores. Imagine beginning every day with a bowl of bready brew, foamy and cloudy, equal parts sustenance and social glue. A woman tips a jar toward you, the rim coarse with clay, and you feel the lukewarm liquid pour into a smaller cup. It is heavy, grainy, dotted with floating chaff from the barley. You hesitate. This looks like something scraped from the bottom of a bread bowl after a flood, but the workers around you gulp it with gusto, wiping their mouths with the backs of their hands, belching unapologetically, then going back for more. And so you sip. It is sour, not unpleasantly, but sharply so, with a sweetness that lingers at the edges, like honey turned rebellious. Your tongue meets grit, your teeth grind against husks, and yet after a few swallows, you feel a warmth bloom in your chest. Not the dizzying warmth of drunkenness. This brew is weak in alcohol, but the steady fuel of calories your body craves before a day of toil. Think of this beer less as a luxury and more as liquid bread. It carries the same nutrients, the same energy, but in a form that can be gulped quickly on the way out the door. Archaeologists have found evidence of breweries attached to almost every settlement, sometimes massive operations with vats big enough to drown in, dedicated to feeding entire work crews. You picture the brewing process. sprouted barley dried in the sun, loaves of barely baked bread crumbled into water. The mixture left to bubble and ferment in clay jars. What results is not glamorous, but it is life-sustaining, a drink so common that even the lowest labourer could expect it daily. Without beer, the pyramids may never have risen. Without beer, the plough may never have cut its first furrow. As you wipe your lips with the back of your hand, you notice something amusing. A group of children are crouched nearby, sipping from small cups with exaggerated seriousness, their little brows furrowed as though they are imitating their parents. The beer is weak enough that it won't topple them over. More nourishment than intoxication, but you can't help but chuckle. Imagine today's playgrounds with juice boxes replaced by tiny clay mugs of foamy brew. School would be a very different place, wouldn't it? The brewing itself carries its own air of mystery. Some say it was an accident. Bread left too long in water, bubbling by chance in the Egyptian sun, discovered when some daring soul took a sip and decided the odd taste was worth repeating. Others argue it was intentional from the beginning, a calculated method born of experimentation with grain and time. Historians still debate how much of brewing was science and how much was luck, whether Egyptians truly understood fermentation or simply embraced the miracle. What is certain is that they mastered it, refined it, and turned it into the heartbeat of their mornings. Now lean closer to the brewing yard. The jars bubble faintly, releasing little pops of air that rise and vanish. The workers stir the mash with long wooden poles, faces grimy with sweat, hands coated in a sticky mixture of grain and foam. The smell is pungent, filling your nose with sour sweetness that clings to your hair and tunic. A thin film forms on the surface, and flies buzz greedily, darting away when someone waves a ragged hand. And yet, for all its mess, this is a sacred act. The goddess Hathor herself was sometimes called the mistress of drunkenness, a deity linked to both joy and catastrophe, reminding mortals that beer was more than a drink. It was a bridge between the mundane and the divine. It wasn't always just barley either. Some brewers mixed in dates for extra sweetness, creating a richer flavour, something closer to dessert. Others tossed in herbs or honey when supplies allowed. You picture sipping one of those spiced brews, thicker, sweeter, with a faint bite of coriander or a golden drizzle of nectar. A breakfast fit for someone with a little more wealth. Meanwhile, the workers drank the plain stuff, nodding in satisfaction as it slid down their throats. To them, there was no difference. It all kept you standing under the sun. Watch closely now as a man hoists a full jar onto his shoulder, wobbling under the weight. He carries it to a group of farmers who squat in a circle, sharing from one container, each sip passed like a prayer. There is laughter here, tired but genuine, the sound of men finding humour in the short reprieve before backbreaking labour. One man tells a joke about his wife's bread being so dense it could sink a boat. The others roar with laughter, beer spilling down their chins. Even in the struggle of survival, there is this: the warmth of shared drink, the camaraderie of a morning cup. And here's the quirky part that makes you grin. Beer jars were sometimes stamped with the name of the brewer or the estate that produced them, like ancient brand labels. Imagine wandering through a bustling market and choosing between brewery of the noble Seneb or House of Khufu's finest barley blend, comparing flavors like you might compare craft beers today. Branding is not as modern as we think. It was already etched into clay 4,000 years ago. But not everyone agreed on beer's place in life. Some priests and scribes warned against overindulgence, writing stern texts about drunkenness leading to shame, violence, and regret. Others celebrated it as a gift of the gods, necessary to ease the burdens of mortal existence. Even the myths conflicted. In one tale, Hathor nearly destroys humanity in a drunken rage, only to be pacified with vats of beer dyed red to look like blood. Was beer salvation or danger? Nourishment or temptation? The arguments echo still, like the bubbles popping in those clay jars. You take another sip, letting the sour tang linger on your tongue, and for a moment you understand why this was more than just food. It was routine, comfort, and connection. Bread filled your stomach, but beer filled the spaces between people. It loosened the tongue, softened the edges of exhaustion, and reminded you that even in a world of relentless labor, there could be sweetness, however faint. Now the sun is climbing higher, shadows shortening, the golden light pressing harder against the land. The farmers rise, wiping their mouths, slinging tools across their shoulders. Their baskets carry bread, their hands still sticky with beer, their eyes squinting against the brightness. Children scamper after them, still giggling, their little mugs empty. The brewing yard grows quieter as the last jars are hauled away, the bubbling pots left to ferment for tomorrow's dawn. And you, standing there, realize that breakfast here is not a quiet moment of solitude, but a communal ritual of bread and beer, chewed and gulped, gritty and sweet. It is messy, noisy, imperfect, and yet utterly essential. You set down your empty cup, wipe your lips, and join the flow of bodies moving toward the fields, your stomach steady, your spirit a little lighter. You may not love the taste, but you cannot deny the truth. Without this morning beer, Egypt itself might never have woken. The beer has left a warmth in your chest, the bread a heaviness in your belly, but you are not finished yet. The Egyptians never were. Morning in this land is a layered feast, not because it's extravagant in quantity, but because each bite, each sip, each chew holds the story of how people live and work. And now, as the sun begins to spill gold across mudbrick walls and glitters on the surface of the Nile, you notice another texture appearing in the hands of early risers, a basket tucked under the arm of a young girl, brimming with figs so plump their skins look like they might burst, and dates glistening with a sticky sheen that clings to her fingers. The sight alone makes your mouth water. Imagine those little jewels of sugar, far sweeter than the dense bread or the sour beer, a reminder that even in a world where survival is hard, pleasure still sneaks into the morning. You take one, a date soft enough to leave syrup on your palm, and bite. The sweetness floods your tongue, so rich it almost feels rebellious. In a single mouthful, you understand why dates became more than food here. They were medicine, currency, and symbols of life. The sticky residue clings to your lips, and you lick it away like a child who doesn't want to waste even a drop. These fruits were not rare luxuries, but staples. The date palm was called the tree of life for good reason. Its fruit ripened in vast quantities, dried easily, and stored well, making it a year-round source of sweetness and energy. Figs too, easy to grow, high in sugar, and eaten both fresh and dried, were tucked into baskets, carried into fields, and slipped into mouths as a quick bite between tasks. Archaeologists have even found them in sealed jars, preserved in tombs, their shapes still recognizable millennia later. Imagine discovering a fig that was picked before the Trojan War and still looking like something you could pop in your mouth. You can picture the mornings when farmers, hurrying into the fields, grabbed a handful of dried dates or figs as they left the house, chewing as they walked, juice sticking to their beards. Children, scampering at their heels, sucked on them like sweets. Mothers tucked them into cloth bundles, ensuring their families had bursts of energy long after the bread was gone. The sound of teeth sinking into soft fruit, the laughter of children with sticky cheeks, the casual toss of a fig stem into the dust. This is another layer of breakfast, as familiar to them as your morning coffee is to you. And here is a curious little image for you. Sometimes, to make dried dates more interesting, people stuff them with nuts or seeds, a primitive snack bar in a land where convenience was always practical. You imagine biting into one of those, a chewy exterior bursting into crunch, salty and sweet mingling in your mouth. It feels startlingly modern, as if the ancients had already discovered trail mix before hikers ever did. But not everyone agrees on just how important these fruits were in the daily diet. Some historians argue that dates and figs were common and cheap enough to be eaten by all classes, a democratic sweet available in every village. Others suggest they were more valued than we think, sometimes reserved for special meals, gifts, or temple offerings. Did every worker munch on dates before heading to the fields? Or was that the privilege of those with access to groves and trade? The truth drifts somewhere in between, the evidence scattered like fig seeds across the desert. Still, when you imagine the life of the worker, sweating in the heat, swinging his hoe into the soil, what carries him through the morning is not just bread or beer, but the sudden burst of sugar from a fruit tucked into his pouch. Think of the energy, the tiny shot of joy, The reminder that life could be sweet even in toil. That too is breakfast. Look around now. You see women sitting on low stools, slicing fresh figs in half, laying them in the sun to dry. The fruit glistens in the light, bees humming hungrily above them, the air filled with a perfume so rich it feels heavy. Children dart in and steal slices when their mothers aren't looking, their laughter giving them away instantly. The mothers sigh, shake their heads, and sometimes pretend not to notice. After all, who can resist? You wouldn't either. Over by the Nile, a man unloads a basket of dates from a boat. They came from upriver, hauled in woven crates stacked high. He spills them out in the market, where their glossy skins shimmer under the morning sun, a pile of amber and crimson jewels tempting every passerby. A scribe stops, selects a few, and tucks them into his satchel before continuing to his office. A laborer counts his meager coins and buys a smaller handful, tucking them away for later. Both men, rich and poor, meet at the same sweetness, even if their baskets differ. It is strange to think how these simple fruits stitch themselves into myth and medicine too. Dates were said to promote fertility, figs to strengthen the body. Some mothers crushed figs into paste for their babies, softening the fruit into porridge. Others fermented dates into a syrup used to sweeten bread or beer, turning them from snack to ingredient. The line between food and medicine blurred, as it so often does in the ancient world, where every bite seemed to have meaning beyond the taste. And let's not forget the imagery carved into stone. On tomb walls, you see servants carrying baskets overflowing with dates and figs, gifts for the afterlife. The fruits are painted so carefully, you can almost feel their texture, the sticky sheen of a date, the tiny seeds peeking out of a sliced fig. These were not decorative details. They were promises. Even beyond death, the dead would not be denied the sweetness of morning fruit. So now, as you chew another date, feel the syrup cling to your teeth, and lick your fingers clean, you realize this is more than just food. It is an anchor, a reminder that amidst bread and beer, grit and labor, there could be softness and sweetness. A reminder that humans crave not only survival, but delight. And as the morning moves on, the sun rising higher, you join the farmers heading into the fields, their baskets bouncing against their hips, their mouths sticky with fruit. The taste lingers long after the bite is gone, just as the memory of Egypt lingers long after its empires fade. By now, the sweetness of figs and the syrupy stick of dates still lingers in your mouth. But as you follow the tide of people further from the riverbank and closer toward the low houses and fields, a sharper, more insistent smell cuts through the morning haze. It is raw, pungent, and almost startling, like the sting of fresh-cut grass mixed with fire. At first you wrinkle your nose, but then you realize the source. Hands are busy peeling onions, biting straight into them, crunching loudly with no hesitation. You might call it harsh, maybe even unpleasant so early in the day, but to the Egyptians it was breakfast strength distilled into a bulb. Onions were everywhere here, small ones, long ones, white, red, and yellow, and people ate them raw as if they were apples. Picture a farmer crouching on his haunches in the dust, loaf of bread in one hand, an onion in the other, alternating bites between the two. His eyes water, but he does not flinch. To him, the sharpness is not discomfort. It is vigor. He believes the onion keeps him strong, protects him from illness, sharpens his body for the long day ahead. You glance at the laborers heading toward the pyramids, baskets of onions swinging against their hips, and suddenly you understand. This is not garnish, not flavor, but fuel. There are carvings on tomb walls showing offerings of onions, and even dried bulbs have been found tucked into the wrappings of mummies, perfectly preserved across thousands of years. The concentric rings of the onions seem to symbolize eternity, layer upon layer, never ending. Priests sometimes use them in rituals, laying bulbs on the altars of gods as though they too might require the sting of sharpness to start the day. So when you see someone casually bite into one at dawn, you realize you are not just witnessing breakfast, you are watching a spiritual act disguised as a quick snack. The crunch echoes through the morning air. A boy gnaws on a small bulb, eyes watering but face determined, like he is proving something. A woman slices onions into a bowl of lentils, their sharp scent mingling with the earthy paste. Even fishermen heading out on the Nile carry onions tied together by their stalks, slung over shoulders like garlands. Everyone stinks of them, but no one cares. Perhaps they even relish it. The bite of onion becomes part of the smell of the community itself. And here's the detail that might surprise you. Onions were thought to ward off evil spirits and disease. Some people hung them in doorways or carried them as charms, believing their pungency could drive away sickness. Imagine a worker chewing an onion, not only to fill his belly, but to keep bad luck at bay. Breakfast, medicine, and magic all in one stinking bulb. The thought almost makes you laugh. Picture a man with onion juice running down his chin, convinced he has just secured divine protection. Maybe, in some way, he has. But historians still wonder about just how much onions really fueled the great projects of Egypt. Did pyramid workers truly receive onions as part of their daily rations, as some ancient accounts suggest? Some say yes, pointing to records mentioning vast amounts of onions, garlic, and radishes distributed to laborers. Others argue the scale has been exaggerated, that onions were present but not the primary staple of workers' diets. Was the pyramid built on onions and bread, or is that image part of Egypt's myth-making? The debate continues, much like the lingering bite of the vegetable itself. For you, though, there is no debate. You chew one now, and the flavor floods your mouth, hot and biting, a taste that feels alive. It is not pleasant in the way fruit is pleasant. It is a challenge. Your eyes sting, your nose twitches, but your body warms. You feel awake. You feel ready. You glance at the man beside you, who grins through tears streaming from his eyes, and you grin back. Breakfast may be brutal, but it binds. The fields are filling now. Farmers scatter seeds, their bodies bent low, their backs already aching under the newborn sun. They reach into small sacks, pull out handfuls of grain, and toss them in wide arcs, onions still clenched in their teeth as they work. The smell drifts across the fields like a pungent cloud, stronger even than the smell of the Nile or the damp earth. You might think it unpleasant, but to the Egyptians, it was the scent of endurance. In the village, the grinding stones still turn. The ovens still smoke, but outside in the dust, it is the crunch of onions that marks the rhythm of the morning. Children dart past, holding bulbs like toys, biting into them with squeals of both pain and pride. A grandmother peels skins deftly, layering them into a pot for stew. Even animals are fed scraps of onion peel, the smell clinging to their fur. It seeps into everything, this humble bulb, until you cannot tell where the food ends and the air begins. And perhaps that is the greatest truth of all, that breakfast in Egypt was not merely about taste or hunger, but about ritual, belief, and identity. The bread gave strength, the beer gave energy, the fruit gave sweetness, but the onion gave sharpness, resilience, a kind of spiritual armor against the punishing day. And as you crunch through another bite, eyes watering, nose tingling, you realize you are tasting not only the onion itself, but the endurance of a civilization that carried these flavors through centuries. The sun climbs higher. Farmers straighten briefly, shading their eyes, then bend again to their tasks. The smell of onions lingers, sharp and stubborn, refusing to fade. And you, wiping your eyes with the back of your hand, continue forward with them, carrying the taste of Egypt's most defiant breakfast in your mouth. Your eyes are still watering from the onion bite when the smell shifts again. Subtler this time, but no less commanding. It comes from the same baskets, the same markets, the same households, but this odor is deeper, earthier, and somehow darker, clinging not to the air, but to your skin. Garlic. The sharp little cloves are being pulled apart, peeled and chewed raw by men and women who swear it makes their blood stronger, their backs sturdier, and their spirits harder to break under the weight of the sun. You watch as a worker on his way to the fields pops a whole clove into his mouth and chews furiously, his face scrunching, his breath suddenly lethal. His friends laugh, swatting at the stench, but then follow suit, each of them biting down with audible crunches. The sound is violent in its own way, like teeth-crushing bone. But what it delivers is endurance. Garlic was believed to give stamina, to keep illness at bay, to guard against curses. For pyramid builders, garlic was as much a part of their rations as bread or beer. And you realize quickly that a morning in Egypt doesn't smell like sweetness or freshness. It smells like pungent determination. You've probably noticed by now that Egypt wasn't shy about its breakfast flavors. No gentle bowls of porridge, no delicate teas, no shy little fruits arranged neatly on a tray. Here, the day begins with food that makes your eyes sting, your breath pungent, your stomach burns slightly as it digests. Bread fills you, beer soothes you, fruit sweetens you, but garlic armors you. It is like swallowing fire so you can endure the blaze of noon. And though you might laugh at the sheer stink of it, garlic's reputation was so important that stories say workers once went on strike when their supply was interrupted. Imagine the scene. Thousands of men halting construction of a pharaoh's monument because they hadn't received their daily dose of garlic. They refused to lift another block until the cloves returned. It sounds almost ridiculous. Millions of stones waiting, while laborers cross their arms and demand not wages, not beer, but garlic. And yet in their world, that clove was wages, was survival. Without it, they felt naked before the day. You hold one of the bulbs in your hand, its papery skin flaking away, the cloves tight and gleaming inside. You break one open, and instantly your fingers smell for the rest of the morning. Impossible to wash away no matter how many times you dip them in the Nile. You bite down, and the burn rushes across your tongue, through your nose, into your chest. Your breath feels fiery, your eyes blink against the sting. It is not pleasant, but it is powerful. You suddenly feel more awake than you have all morning, as if your blood itself has quickened. Perhaps that's what they meant when they said garlic gave stamina. It shocks your senses into feeling alive. Nearby, you see women hanging braids of garlic on doorways, each bulb tied together by their stalks, dangling like pale ornaments. It is both storage and superstition. Garlic was thought to repel evil, to drive away spirits, to keep the sick from entering. You picture a child tucked inside a house, safe not because the door is barred, but because garlic swings above it, a talisman against what cannot be seen. Breakfast in this way slips into magic again, each bite a ritual as much as a meal. Of course, there are debates about just how vital garlic truly was in the Egyptian diet. Some point to records of rations for pyramid workers, insisting garlic was part of their daily allotment. Others argue the texts have been misinterpreted, that what was listed might have been radishes or other pungent vegetables instead. Was garlic truly the backbone of worker endurance, or has history exaggerated its role, drawn in by its pungency? The arguments persist, smoky as the breath of a man who has just eaten a clove at dawn. And yet, in practice, you can't escape it. The marketplace smells of it, strong and unashamed. A merchant crouches beside a pile of bulbs, shouting their price, his own words muffled by the clove he chews as he works. Farmers tuck cloves into their waistbands, ready to pop them into their mouths when they need an extra push. Priests, ironically, sometimes forbade themselves garlic before entering temple rituals, believing its strong odor unfit for sacred purity. So the same plant that fueled the worker was denied to the priest, a divide that smells as much of belief as it does of sulfur. Now picture yourself walking through a worker's village. Children chase each other in narrow alleys, the dust rising under their bare feet. Mothers call them back for breakfast, tearing bread, pouring beer, slicing onions, and handing over garlic cloves like candy. The children groan but chew anyway, eyes squinting against the burn. Their laughter bursts out between coughs, and the whole alley echoes with it. Even their games taste of garlic, their shouts carrying the smell through the air. You sit with a group of laborers before they set off toward the quarries. They squat in a circle, reed baskets between them. One man breaks off chunks of bread, another pours beer, and a third tosses a handful of garlic cloves into the middle. They each take one, peel it with their nails, and chew it down without a second thought. Then they rise, sling ropes and tools over their shoulders, and march toward the horizon, breath reeking, but spirits braced. It is a simple ritual, but it binds them. They smell the same, they taste the same, and they face the same grueling day together. As you follow them, you realize this is the true face of Egyptian breakfast. Not elegance, not comfort, but resilience. Garlic does not pamper you. It punishes you. It burns your mouth. It makes your eyes water. It drives people to stand downwind from you. And yet it also convinces you that you can endure, that you can haul a stone, that you can plow a field, that you can push through 12 hours of heat. That is why it mattered so much. Not because it was delicious, but because it was defiance you could chew. So you bite again, swallow hard, and feel the burn settle in your stomach. The sun climbs, the land brightens, and the air fills with the mingled scents of bread, beer, onions, and now garlic. Together they form a chorus, each note harsh and unyielding, but together making a song of survival. This is Egypt's breakfast symphony, pungent and proud, impossible to forget. The sharpness of garlic still burns faintly on your breath, and you think you can't possibly layer one more flavor into this morning when the Nile reminds you otherwise. The river, constant and tireless, is already alive with activity. Nets splash, ropes creak, and voices echo across the surface as fishermen pull in their catch before the sun climbs any higher. And here you see the next piece of Egypt's breakfast laid out plainly. Fish, small and briny, sometimes dried stiff in the sun, sometimes salted until they sting your tongue, sometimes roasted quickly on a clay pan before being tossed onto bread. If the bread and beer gave the body fuel, and the onions and garlic gave it bite, then the fish gave it a tang that clung to the air like the river itself. Stand on the bank with them. You see men in narrow boats, papyrus bundles tied together with twine, standing upright as they cast their nets. The Nile shimmers under them, silver fish darting just beneath the surface, their scales flashing in the morning light like coins tossed by invisible hands. The fishermen pull, nets heavy, water spilling over their ankles, and laugh with relief when the catch is good. They empty the wriggling bodies into baskets, slap the water from their faces, and head back toward the waiting women who are already preparing fires. The smell reaches you long before the baskets do. Dried fish being pulled from racks where they hung overnight, their flesh toughened by the desert air, their skins wrinkled and dark. Salted fish piled into jars, brine dripping down the sides, pungent and sharp. Fresh fish gutted quickly, scales flying as a knife scrapes across the body, ready to be tossed on coals for just long enough to blacken the edges. There is no refrigeration here, no ice, no storage. Preservation is a matter of drying, salting, and praying the river stays generous. You pick up one of the small dried fish, its body stiff, its eyes clouded. It does not look appetizing by modern standards, yet when you bite into it, the salt shocks your tongue, the meat chewy but sustaining. It pairs perfectly with the bread you had earlier, the combination of dry grain and briny protein filling in the gaps of nutrition. The beer washes it down, and suddenly you understand why this was a staple. Not elegant but effective, not luxurious but vital. And here comes a little detail that makes you grin. Sometimes, in a pinch, Egyptians ate fish raw, fresh from the Nile, scales hastily stripped away. Children especially would grab the smaller ones, biting straight into them with reckless joy. The idea might make you shudder, but to them it was a delicacy, a chance to taste the river at its freshest. You imagine the laughter of children with fish juice dripping down their chins, proud of themselves for stealing a taste before the adults cooked it. Still, not everyone viewed fish so fondly. Some priests avoided it entirely, considering it unclean or unworthy of ritual meals. Certain species were even taboo, tied to myths that cast them as enemies of the gods. Was fish the food of the commoner, while priests and nobles turned up their noses? Or did those restrictions apply only in specific regions and temples? Historians still argue, the evidence slippery as the fish themselves. What is clear is that for workers and farmers, the debate didn't matter. Fish was breakfast, and fish kept them alive. Picture the scene in a worker's hut near the fields. The family gathers on reed mats, a loaf of bread in the center, a small pile of dried fish beside it, and a jug of beer nearby. They tear off bread, pinch a bit of fish with it, chew together, wash it down with beer, then reach for more. The taste is salty, heavy, filling. The smell fills the room, clings to their hands, sticks in their hair. Even hours later, in the blazing sun, the scent of fish stays with them, a reminder of the river that sustains every part of their lives. The Nile itself feels different now that you've tasted its gift. Its waves are not just scenery but sustenance. Every ripple holds potential. Every flash of silver beneath the surface a promise. And so breakfast expands again. From bread and beer, onions and garlic, figs and dates, now to fish. The flavor of the river itself. As you chew another bite of dried fish, the sun climbs higher and the air thickens with heat. Farmers and builders, priests and scribes, all rise to face their days, but almost all carry the same taste in their mouths. Bread, beer, and fish. Together, they form a triangle of survival, strong enough to outlast empires. By now, the taste of salt lingers at the back of your throat, the Nile's fishy tang refusing to let go, and you wonder if breakfast in this place is destined always to be pungent, gritty, and relentless. Then you see something else carried carefully down a narrow street, and it changes the air entirely. A clay jug, its rim sealed with wax, tilted gently so that the pale liquid inside doesn't spill. The smell is faint at first, subtle, but unmistakable once it reaches you. Milk. Real milk, drawn from goats or cows, fresh enough that the warmth of the animal still clings to it. And in some households, if fortune smiled, a spoonful of honey would be stirred in, golden sweetness dissolving into creamy white. You pause, because here at last is softness. Milk in ancient Egypt was not a universal drink. It was precious, often reserved for children, the sick, or those who could afford the luxury. Goats and cows gave it, but their milk was not produced in endless abundance. Animals were prized for other reasons too, for their labor, their hides, their role in ritual. So when you see someone sipping milk at dawn, you know you are glimpsing something rare, almost indulgent. And when honey enters the picture, thick and golden, glistening like sunlight trapped in syrup, it feels more like dessert than breakfast. A woman tips a cup toward you and you sip. The milk is warm, slightly sour, richer than what you might expect. Then she dips a wooden spoon into a jar of honey and stirs it in. Suddenly the flavor transforms. Sweetness floods the mouth, balancing the tang, smoothing the rough edges. You smile without meaning to. It is comforting, indulgent, a pause in a world otherwise filled with onion bites and briny fish. You glance at the honey jar and notice how precious it looks. Beeswax seals the top, and when it's broken, the smell bursts forth. Floral, wild, earthy. Honey in Egypt was highly valued, used in offerings to gods, medicine, even embalming practices. To taste it at breakfast is to taste both luxury and sanctity. You imagine priests placing jars of honey on altars, the golden liquid shimmering in torchlight, or pharaohs demanding honey for their tables, certain that something so radiant must surely be divine. But here's the quirky twist. Honey wasn't the only sweetener. Sometimes date syrup filled the role, a cheaper, more common drizzle made by boiling down the fruits of the palm. It was thick, dark, sticky, and clung to bread or porridge. Children licked it off their fingers with delight, leaving trails of brown sweetness on their cheeks. So if honey was the luxury, date syrup was the practical stand-in, the everyday cousin. You can picture children squabbling over the last drop at the bottom of the jar, mothers sighing as they tried to divide it fairly, fathers pretending not to notice as they stole a spoonful before work. Still, there are arguments about how much ordinary Egyptians truly consumed milk. Some scholars argue it was rare, pointing out that cattle were too valuable to be milked extensively, their strength better used for ploughing and transport. Others suggest goats provided plenty, their smaller bodies yielding enough to supply households without draining resources. Was milk a daily treat for many, or a rare indulgence for a few? The debate is ongoing, and as you sip your cup, you realize you've stumbled into the middle of it. Look now at the children gathered in the courtyard. One small boy sits with a cup of milk, dunking his bread into it until it softens enough to chew easily. His sister begs for a sip, and he reluctantly shares, their laughter bubbling up as the milk dribbles down their chins. An older woman, perhaps their grandmother, stirs honey into her own cup, sighing contentedly as she sips. For them, this is more than food. It is comfort, a rare gentleness in a life that demands strength. You step further into the courtyard and see a low table where small bowls of milk have been set out, some plain, some swirled with honey. Around them, family members gather, sitting cross-legged, breaking bread, dipping it into the bowls, tearing pieces for one another. The sweetness lingers in the air, mixing with the smell of smoke from the oven, with the sharper scents of onions and garlic carried in from outside. This moment is quieter, softer, as though the milk itself has hushed the noise. But outside the walls of this household, the clamor continues. In the marketplace, jars of milk are sold quickly, often traded before they even reach the stalls. A man pours from one clay jar into smaller vessels, the foam spilling down his arm as buyers press coins into his hand. A jar of honey gleams on the next stall, its surface catching the sunlight, drawing gasps from those who can only admire and not afford. A wealthy scribe passes, purchases it without hesitation, and carries it away as if he has secured treasure. A farmer lingers, sighs, and moves on, knowing sweetness will come only from dates for him. And yet, no matter the wealth, milk and honey found their way into stories and symbolism. They became shorthand for abundance, for paradise, for the dream of plenty in a land always hovering between feast and famine. To sip them at dawn is to step briefly into that dream, to believe for a moment that the day ahead might be kinder than it usually is. You finish your cup, the sweetness still coating your tongue, and you feel almost spoiled, as though you've stolen a privilege. The children laugh around you. The grandmother hums as she scrapes the last of the honey from the jar, and outside, the river keeps flowing, the workers keep shouting, the fields keep filling. But inside this small space, Breakfast feels like a gift rather than a necessity, and you, for once, are content to sit, to sip slowly, to let the sweetness linger. The sweetness of milk and honey fades gently on your tongue, but your body still craves something sturdier, something that presses down into your stomach with weight rather than floating lightly across your palate. And so your attention shifts once again to the courtyards and markets where families gather around clay bowls, breaking bread and dipping it into spreads thicker, earthier, and darker. This is the moment when olives and lentils step onto the morning stage. Picture a shallow bowl, its surface gleaming with oil, a cluster of black and green olives piled in the center like small stones pulled from the earth. Beside it sits another bowl filled with lentil mash, the color of earth after rain. Brown, soft, slightly coarse. Someone takes a hunk of bread, tears it, dips one end into the lentils, scoops an olive onto it, and eats. The taste is dense, salty, grounding. If milk and honey were morning's gentle embrace, olives and lentils are its strong handshake, practical and filling, the kind of food that holds you upright through a long morning in the fields. The lentils especially are everywhere, humble but dependable, cooked into soups, mashed into paste, even dried and stored for months. They gave Egyptians a plant-based backbone to their meals. Archaeologists have found traces of lentils in tombs, painted them in banquet scenes, and listed them on ration records. They were cheap, hearty, and easy to grow. Everything you want in a food that has to feed thousands of hungry workers. You spoon some into your mouth and feel the earthiness settle, a heaviness that is not unpleasant but reassuring. Olives, on the other hand, came with a bit more flair. Though not as central to Egyptian life as grain or beer, they still made their way onto tables, often pickled or preserved, sometimes eaten plain, sometimes pressed for their oil. The oil itself became more valuable than the fruit, used for cooking, for lamps, even for anointing bodies in ritual. But in the morning, what matters is the taste. That briny burst, that sharp tang against the softness of bread and lentils. It wakes the tongue in a way as sharp as onions, but without the tears. And here's a curious little image for you. Olives were sometimes stored in amphorae sealed with a thick layer of oil at the top, keeping air from spoiling the fruit. Imagine pulling off the seal at dawn, dipping your hand in, and fishing out a handful of slick, salty bites. A little messy, yes, but delicious all the same. Children would sometimes sneak them, popping olives into their mouths before parents could scold them for wasting what was valuable. You can picture the guilty grins, the juice dribbling down their chins, the inevitable sticky fingerprints left on the walls. But when it comes to olives, historians still argue over just how important they truly were to Egyptians. Some say they were common enough, integrated into daily diets, traded easily along Mediterranean routes. Others argue olives were more of a luxury, something that filtered in from neighboring cultures and never became as ubiquitous as dates or figs. Did every farmer crunch an olive at dawn, or was that privilege limited to certain households with access to groves? The truth is hazy, like the brine itself clouding in a storage jar, and the debate continues with no clear answer. Still, for you now, sitting cross-legged on a reed mat with a bowl in front of you, the question doesn't matter. You scoop more lentils with your bread, press an olive onto it, and chew slowly. The textures clash, the softness of lentils, the firmness of olives. But together they make sense. The salt sharpens, the earth grounds, and your belly thanks you for the combination. Around you, the courtyard hums. A grandmother mashes lentils in a stone bowl, her hands steady, her rhythm patient. A boy runs past with an olive pit in his mouth, spitting it into the dirt before dashing away again. A man wipes olive oil across his bread with practiced fingers, careful not to waste a drop. The air smells of earth, brine, and smoke, mingling into something both ordinary and timeless. You take another bite and notice how the lentils cling stubbornly to the bread, thick enough to stick but soft enough to melt once chewed. The olives burst against your teeth, their tang chasing the earthiness away, leaving a trail of salt on your lips. You lick it away absent-mindedly, as others around you do the same. Breakfast becomes not just sustenance but a tactile ritual. The texture of bread in your fingers, the smear of lentils on your skin, the juice of olives slipping down your chin, and this too connects to the sacred. Lentils were sometimes linked to offerings for the dead, their humble nature a symbol of continuity. Olives too carried symbolic weight, their oil used in lamps that burned in tombs and temples, light meant to guide souls or honor gods. You realize quickly, that what you chew casually now might once have been placed carefully in the hands of a mummy, meant to carry a spirit into eternity. The line between breakfast and eternity is thin here, thinner than you'd expect. The sun climbs higher. Outside the courtyard, the sound of workers heading to fields grows louder. Sandals slapping dust, voices calling, tools clanging. But inside, the family lingers a little longer, savouring the grounding foods before the long day. You take another bite, another sip of beer to wash it down, and feel the solidity of olives and lentils settle in your stomach. They are not glamorous, not rare, but they are steady, and perhaps that is the true beauty of them. This is food that does not dazzle, but endures. As you rise, brushing crumbs from your lap, you look back once more at the bowls on the table. The lentils mashed smooth, the olives glistening with brine, the breadcrumbs scattered around. It is not a feast, not by noble standards, but it is breakfast, and it is enough. The olives and lentils have left their weight in your belly, sturdy and grounding, but your feet carry you beyond the family courtyards, through narrow lanes of mudbrick houses, toward the clusters of huts that hug the edge of the desert. Here the air changes. The Nile's freshness fades, the greenery thins, and the horizon is a wall of ochre sand that rises into blinding light. This is the workers' village, pressed close to tombs and temples under construction, where men and women who fuel Egypt's monuments live in cramped spaces, their mornings marked not by comfort, but by urgency. The huts are small, walls of rough mud brick, roofs flat and low, reed mats covering dirt floors. Smoke curls from holes in the walls where fires burn, and the chatter here is different, quicker, sharper, tinged with fatigue before the day has even begun. You duck inside one and find a family huddled around a reed mat that doubles as both table and bed. Breakfast is spread before them, not in abundance, but in necessity. A basket of bread, rough and heavy, baked yesterday and already hard around the edges. A clay jug of beer, thick and frothy, its sour smell filling the cramped room. A bowl of onions, skins half peeled, their pungency already stinging the air. The father tears a hunk of bread, dips it briefly into the beer to soften it, and chews. The mother does the same, handing smaller chunks to her children, who dunk theirs clumsily, beer dribbling down their chins. One child grimaces at the bitterness, but the parents chuckle, encouraging him to swallow. It is a rite of passage here, learning to stomach the beer and bread together, to make do with what is at hand. The onions are crunched raw, their sharpness cutting through the heaviness of the bread and beer. You watch as the family eats without ceremony, each bite practical, quick, their conversation sparse. Time is short. The overseers will be calling soon, and every man and boy must report to the quarries or fields. The women too will head out, some to haul water, some to grind grain for communal ovens, some to help in the kitchens that feed entire crews. Breakfast here is not leisurely, it is fuel swallowed fast before the long march into labour. And yet, even in this plainness, you find moments of intimacy. The way the mother wipes crumbs from her youngest child's mouth with the edge of her tunic. The way the father tears off a larger piece of bread and pretends to scowl as he sneaks it to his eldest, who grins proudly. The way laughter bubbles up, short but genuine, when someone bites into an especially pungent onion. For a fleeting moment, the village feels warm, connected, alive. Outside, the communal ovens smoke. Neighbours line up with their baskets, waiting their turn. The bakers, exhausted from hours of kneading and shaping, still move briskly, shoving loaves into the hot clay mouths, pulling out charred bread, slapping it onto trays. Children scurry around their feet, chasing each other, occasionally stealing a crumb when the bakers aren't looking. A dog noses through the dust, hoping for scraps. The entire village hums like a hive, the ovens its buzzing heart. And here's an unusual detail. Some workers carried small amulets tucked into their belts, charms shaped like loaves of bread or jugs of beer, as though to guarantee that even if the overseers were cruel, even if the rations faltered, they would still find sustenance. Imagine trudging into the desert with a tiny clay loaf tied to your waist, a silent prayer that hunger would not undo you. Breakfast was not only eaten, it was symbolized, carried, worn like protection. But scholars argue about the conditions of these villages. Were they harsh, cramped, barely tolerable, as some imagine from the size of the huts and the simplicity of the meals? Or were they more organized, almost comfortable compared to what peasants had in scattered farms, with communal bakeries, medical care, and steady rations. Evidence from Deir el-Medina, a later workers' village, shows signs of both hardship and relative privilege. Was this breakfast the meal of the downtrodden or the fuel of specialists treated better than we assume? The truth is slippery, buried under layers of sand and interpretation. For now, what you know is this: the family rises from their mat, bellies warmed by bread and beer, breath pungent with onion, hands still sticky with crumbs. The father slings his tool across his shoulder, the mother ties her shawl tighter. The children wipe their mouths and follow. They step outside into the dust, joining dozens of others streaming down the lane toward the horizon where quarries and tombs wait. Their laughter fades quickly, replaced by the steady beat of sandals on dirt. You follow, but glance back at the hut one more time. Inside, the mat is still covered in crumbs, the air still thick with the smell of breakfast. It is not abundance, not luxury, but it is enough to keep bodies moving, enough to build pyramids, enough to carve gods into stone. And as the village empties, the ovens keep smoking, ready to feed the next day, and the next, and the next, until the monuments are complete, and the gods themselves are fed. The path you follow now curves away from the dust of the workers' huts, and rises gently toward walls of carved stone. The sounds change. Less of children laughing and sandals slapping dirt, more of chanting, low and rhythmic, echoing against pillars. You are entering the precinct of the temple, where mornings unfold not with frantic bites of bread before the quarry, but with rituals timed to the rising sun. Here, breakfast is not just food. It is purity, offering, and divine order. The priests move with precision, their linen robes stark against the shadows, their heads shaved smooth, their bodies washed in cold water before dawn. Their mouths have already spoken hymns to Ra, their hands already lit incense, their eyes already read the first of the day's sacred texts. And now, in the cool chamber beyond the sanctuary, trays are being set out. Honey cakes, golden and fragrant, lie stacked in neat pyramids. Fresh fruit, figs, dates, perhaps even a cluster of grapes brought by traders from afar, rests in reed baskets. Jugs of milk gleam pale in the half-light. And bread, always bread, stands at the center of the spread. Its loaves smoother and lighter than anything pulled from a worker's oven. You watch as a priest tears one of the cakes in half. The scent of honey rises immediately, sticky and sweet, almost overpowering in this incense-thickened air. He eats with deliberate calm, each bite small, as though even the act of chewing is a prayer. Another dips bread into milk, softening it, his eyes closed, lips moving silently as though reciting words only the gods can hear. Nothing here is rushed. Each bite is measured, deliberate, tethered to ritual. And you notice something fascinating. Many of these foods are not eaten first by the priests themselves, but by the statues of the gods they serve. Loaves are carried into the sanctuary, placed at the feet of Ra, Osiris, or Hathor, alongside cups of beer and bowls of fruit. Of course, the stone mouths do not chew, but the symbolism matters. The gods receive their breakfast first, mortals after. The temple meal is both offering and sustenance, sacred and practical at once. The quirky part: some of those offerings, after sitting before the gods for a time, are later eaten by the priests. The divine leftovers become the priestly breakfast. Imagine unwrapping a bundle of cakes, bowing before a statue, placing them at its feet, waiting in reverent silence, and then, a little later, tucking in yourself. It is recycling at its most spiritual. But not everyone agrees about how generous these meals were. Some accounts suggest priests lived richly, dining on fine bread, honey, wine and meat, their lives far more comfortable than those of workers. Others argue that the reality was simpler, that most days even priests ate plain loaves and fruit, with only special occasions bringing true luxury. Were they feasting daily in the god's shadow? Or were they often as frugal as their fellow Egyptians, with ritual more important than flavor? The debate lingers, carved into the silence of ruined temples. For you, though, the scene feels undeniably elevated. You can almost taste the honey cakes, their sweetness coating your teeth, their golden crumbs sticking to your fingers. You sip the milk, richer and cleaner here than in the villages, and dip bread into it until it softens, almost dissolving. A fig bursts against your tongue, its seeds crunching softly, a reminder of the sweetness of life. Around you, the chanting continues. The incense coils, and the air feels heavy with meaning. You glance up at the painted ceilings, stars scattered across deep blue, the sky itself brought indoors. The food on the trays glows in the lamplight as though lit from within, and for a moment you feel you are not eating breakfast but partaking in the cosmos itself. Every bite is layered with centuries of belief. The honey for eternal sweetness, the bread for strength, the fruit for fertility, the milk for purity. When the priests finish, they wash their hands, wipe their mouths, and return to duty. Some carry trays to smaller chambers, others pass leftovers to temple attendants. No bite is wasted, no crumb is ignored. Even in the shadow of gods, the human need for sustenance prevails. As you leave the temple precinct, the air outside feels harsher, the light too bright, the noise of workers jarring after the solemn quiet within. But the taste of that breakfast lingers. Sweet, clean, sacred. And you realize that in Egypt, even something as ordinary as a morning meal could brush against eternity. The solemn quiet of the temple still hums in your ears, the sweetness of honey cakes clinging faintly to your tongue. But as you step back into the broader streets of the city, the rhythm changes again. The stone courtyards and incense-thick air of priests give way to papyrus scrolls, reed pens and ink pots. You are entering the world of the scribes, the men whose breakfasts had to fuel not the lifting of blocks or the chanting of hymns, but the endless scratching of signs onto parchment, the recording of numbers, the telling of stories, the ordering of an empire, one symbol at a time. The scribe's day begins not with sweat, but with ink, not with calloused palms, but with cramped fingers. He wakes in a modest home, a reed mat under his body, his head groggy from too little sleep, because literacy in this world comes with responsibilities that never end. He sits cross-legged, stretches his hands, and glances toward the small tray his wife has already set out. Bread again, of course, there is always bread. But this loaf is finer than the workers, sifted more carefully, baked more evenly, its crust softer, its grit less intrusive. Beside it lies a handful of figs, a small cluster of dates, and, if he is fortunate today, a cup of watered wine, thin but fragrant, to sip slowly as the sun rises. You sit across from him now, and you notice how his breakfast reflects his station. He is not noble, not royal, but his education sets him apart. His bread is lighter, his fruit fresher, his drink slightly more refined. He eats quickly but neatly, tearing bread into small pieces, arranging them carefully on a reed tray, as though even his meal should obey order. The figs stain his fingers. The dates leave syrup on his lips, but he wipes them fastidiously before reaching for the pen he keeps tucked at his waist. Food and work bleed together. He cannot eat without thinking of the texts that demand his attention. One fig bursts in your mouth as you join him, the seeds crunching, the sweetness rushing across your tongue. He nods approvingly, as though to say, "Yes, this will keep you steady at the writing board." His wife pours watered wine into a small cup, its surface shimmering in the morning light. You sip, and it is sour but calming, a thin echo of luxury that softens the dryness of bread. It tastes faintly of herbs, perhaps added deliberately, a little trick to sharpen the mind. You imagine rows of scribes chewing bread, sipping wine, sharpening pens, preparing to spend hours hunched over papyrus with their knees numb and their backs stiff. And here comes a curious little glimpse into their world. Some scribes were known to moisten their reed pens not in water, but in beer or wine, because the liquid clung better to the fibers. Imagine dipping your pen into the same drink you sipped at breakfast, the ink infused faintly with sour beer. It sounds careless, but it worked. And in a way, it tethered their work directly to the food that sustained them. But the role of scribes in Egypt sparks its own debates. Were they comfortable professionals, cushioned by their literacy, eating better and living longer than their laboring counterparts? Or were they overworked civil servants, their hands cramped, their eyes strained, their breakfasts barely different from the peasants they recorded? Some argue that their diets were modest, close to the commoners, while others believe their education gave them access to better rations and privileges. The truth, as usual, lies in the middle. The bread may have been softer, but it was still bread. The figs may have been sweeter, but they were still figs. Watch now as the scribe gathers his satchel. He tucks the last fig into it, along with a small loaf, saving it for later in the day when hunger will gnaw again. He wipes his fingers clean, straightens his robe, and kisses his child on the head before stepping into the street. His breakfast, though not extravagant, has given him what he needs. energy to hold the reed steady, focus to follow the curves of hieroglyphs, patience to endure the endless hours of silence and concentration. In the courtyard of the scribal school nearby, young apprentices are already gathering. Their breakfasts mirror their teachers. Bread and fruit, sometimes a cup of watered beer, rarely anything more. They munch as they chatter nervously about lessons, their reed pens tucked into their belts. One boy bites into a fig, juice dripping down his chin, while another struggles to swallow his beer without coughing. Their laughter breaks the morning air, brief and bright, before the master's stern voice silences them. Even here, breakfast is tied to work, to duty, to the endless climb toward knowledge. And yet, despite the seriousness, there is a certain pride in these meals. To eat bread that is lighter, to drink wine instead of water, to nibble figs while others gnaw raw onions, these are signs of standing. Small signs, but signs nonetheless. The scribe knows it, the apprentice knows it, and you know it too, as you wipe crumbs from your lap and rise to follow them. The sun is higher now, the heat beginning to press down, but the scribes step into it calmly, their bellies steadied by bread, fruit, and wine. Their mouths may not reek of garlic or fish, but their hands will reek of ink soon enough, black stains spreading across their fingers like tattoos of knowledge. Their breakfast has done its work, not to fuel stone or sweat, but to fuel words. And in Egypt, sometimes words were even heavier than blocks. The scribes have settled into their schools and offices, their bellies steadied by figs and softer bread. And as you follow the curve of the street toward wider courtyards lined with palms, you feel the air shift again. The narrow dust of the workers' lanes, the quiet focus of the scribes' homes, gives way to open spaces where laughter rings brighter and servants move briskly, carrying trays polished smooth by use. You have entered the domain of the noble households, where breakfast is not a scramble for survival, but a performance of refinement, a declaration of wealth disguised as a simple morning meal. The first thing you notice is color. In the courtyards of the elite, food is not only eaten, it is displayed. Trays bear eggs with shells tinted cream and pale brown, carefully boiled until the yolk sits firm but not chalky. Honeycombs rest on clay plates, the golden hexagons glistening in the light, their surfaces sticky enough to catch the wings of the flies that buzz helplessly above them. Small bowls hold imported luxuries, perhaps almonds from the Levant, or figs larger than those grown locally, gifts from trade caravans that threaded across deserts and seas. The bread here is white and soft, its flour finely sifted, its grit reduced to almost nothing. You tear a piece and marvel at how much gentler it feels in your mouth than the sand-heavy loaves of the village. A servant sets down a jug of wine diluted with water, not the sour dregs of workers' mugs, but clear and sharp, carrying the faint aroma of herbs steeped overnight. A noblewoman lifts her cup delicately, her fingers adorned with rings, and sips slowly. She gestures for her children to eat, and they reach for eggs first, peeling them clumsily, their fingers sticky with yolk. Their tutor, seated nearby, encourages them to eat fruit as well, lecturing gently about strength of body and clarity of mind. Here, even breakfast is tied to education, though not the grinding repetition of a scribal school, but the softer instruction of privilege. You take a spoon of honey, dip it across the bread, and bite. It melts instantly, sweetness soaking into the softness, clinging to your lips. It tastes decadent compared to the onion and garlic mornings of the villagers. And then you look around and see why. The nobles eat not just to survive, but to distinguish themselves. To show they can afford honey instead of only date syrup, eggs instead of only lentils, imports instead of only local fare. Breakfast is theatre here, a stage on which wealth is displayed with the casualness of routine. And yet, there is still a link between this display and the divine. Honeycombs are placed not only on noble tables, but also on altars. Eggs, round and whole, carry symbolism of rebirth. To consume them is not only to feed the body, but to align with cosmic cycles. The nobles know this, or at least pretend they do, nodding gravely as they peel an egg or drizzle honey. Now here's the quirky detail that makes you smile. Bees were kept in long, horizontal clay tubes stacked like little houses, tended carefully by keepers who smoked the hives to calm the insects. Imagine the buzzing cloud that greeted those men at dawn, the sting-filled chaos that produced the honey on these polished trays. The nobles spoon it onto their bread without thought, but you can't help but picture the poor beekeeper swatting frantically, his skin dotted with welts. Luxury for some always comes with stings for others, but not everyone agrees on how widespread these richer breakfasts were. Some historians suggest nobles truly dined on eggs, honey, and imports regularly, pointing to artistic depictions and preserved foods in tombs. Others argue such meals were more for festivals and rituals, with daily fare not so different from the rest of Egypt. Bread, beer, fruit, with only occasional luxuries. Were the noble courtyards filled with honeycombs each morning? Or are the tomb paintings exaggerations, idealized visions of plenty? The debate continues, like the hum of bees in their clay hives. For now, though, you watch the scene unfold. A servant carries a tray of eggs, their shells still steaming from the fire. Another pours wine into delicate cups, the liquid gleaming ruby in the sun. Children giggle as honey sticks to their fingers, licking them clean while their mother pretends to scold. A father, robed in linen embroidered at the edges, dips bread into olive oil and honey together, chewing thoughtfully as he discusses estate matters with a steward. The steward takes careful notes, his own plate more modest, his bites quicker, as though he is not sure how long he is welcome at the table. You sit quietly, tasting what they taste, watching what they watch. The walls are painted with images of banquets, the courtyard shaded with palms, the food arranged deliberately to catch the light. This is breakfast as statement, breakfast as identity. And as you wipe honey from your lips, you realize that in this society, even the first meal of the day could draw a sharp line between privilege and necessity. The sun creeps higher, servants clear trays, children scatter toward their tutors, and nobles rise, their bellies full and their roles reaffirmed. You step away, leaving behind the sweetness of honey, the softness of white bread, the sheen of imported fruit. Outside these walls, the air grows sharper again, the dust harsher, but for a moment you carry with you the memory of a breakfast gilded by privilege. The noble courtyards still echo faintly with laughter and the sticky sweetness of honeycomb when your path leads onward, toward the sprawling heart of the palace complex. Here the air changes once more. Guards stand at attention, their spears gleaming, their sandals perfectly aligned on sun-warmed stone. Servants scurry like ants, carrying trays, pitchers, and folded linens. And at the center of it all, beyond carved gates, beyond painted columns, the pharaoh's household begins its day. If breakfast for a worker was survival, and for a scribe was steadiness, and for a noble was display, then for the pharaoh it was spectacle, woven as carefully as the linen on his body and the gold on his brow. The room where the first meal is served glows with early light. High windows let the dawn pour in, painting the stone walls in shades of rose and amber. Tables are laid low to the ground, spread with trays that glint with bronze, silver, and sometimes even gold. Food here is not piled but arranged, every item chosen with intention. Loaves of bread sit in neat stacks, smoother and whiter than anything you've yet tasted. Bowls brim with figs, dates, grapes, and pomegranates, their skins split to reveal jeweled seeds. Honey glistens in wide dishes, its golden surface catching the light as though the sun itself has melted onto the table. And then, the luxuries. Roasted cuts of meat, perhaps goose or duck, steaming and rich, their fat glistening as it drips onto platters. Fish from the Nile, not dried or salted, but grilled fresh, their skins crisp, their flesh tender. Wine diluted with water, but poured into goblets etched with lotus blossoms. Even foreign treats appear. Almonds from beyond the desert, jars of imported oils, spices with scents sharp and unfamiliar. This is breakfast as diplomacy, each food a declaration of power and reach. The pharaoh himself enters, attendants clearing the way, their voices hushed but urgent. His seat is more a throne than a chair, set higher than those of his companions, draped with linen and gold. Servants move in with trays, offering him bread first, because bread always comes first. He tears a piece with deliberate grace, dips it into honey, and eats. His every bite is symbolic. He is not only nourishing his body, but demonstrating abundance, proving that Egypt, through him, is fed. You sit to one side, watching, and you realize quickly how layered this meal is. The food is real, yes, but it is also performance. Every noble who joins him, every servant who observes, every diplomat who hears of it later is meant to understand. The pharaoh begins his day with plenty. Where workers gnaw on onions and dried fish, where scribes nibble figs, he feasts. And yet, Beneath the spectacle, the foods are the same at their core. Bread, fruit, beer, wine, honey, the staples of all Egyptians, elevated here to symbols of kingship. Here's the curious part that lingers with you. Sometimes food at the royal table was deliberately exaggerated in art and record. Tomb paintings show trays overflowing with ducks, cattle, geese, jars of beer stacked high, honey poured in rivers. Were those images literal depictions of daily meals, or idealized visions meant to emphasize power? Some historians argue that pharaohs truly dined lavishly each morning, their kitchens producing feasts that dwarfed ordinary fare. Others caution that the depictions are aspirational, more about projecting eternal abundance than recording daily life. Was the royal breakfast a feast every day, or was it sometimes as modest as bread and fruit arranged with pomp? The truth, as always, slips between. For now, though, you taste what is offered. A slice of roasted goose, its fat rich and heavy, lingers on your tongue. A spoonful of honey, sweet beyond reason, clings to your lips. A pomegranate seed bursts in your mouth, tart and sharp, a tiny explosion of life. You sip wine from a goblet etched with lotus petals, its coolness cutting the richness. You understand why this matters. It is not simply about feeding hunger. It is about beginning the day with a reminder of order, power, and plenty. Around you, the courtiers murmur. A steward records the quantities, ensuring nothing is wasted, that every loaf and jug can be accounted for. A servant wipes the table, careful not to let a crumb fall to the ground. Another clears dishes, carrying them away to feed lesser attendants once the pharaoh has finished. Even leftovers here are richer than full meals elsewhere. The chain of abundance extends outward, feeding not just the royal body, but the machinery of the palace itself. As the meal ends, musicians play softly, flutes and lyres filling the air with calm. The pharaoh rises, attendants rushing to adjust his robes, to smooth his headdress, to present his scepter. He has eaten enough to face the rituals, the councils, the ceremonies of the day. His breakfast has done its work, not just in nourishing his body, but in nourishing the image of his divinity. You step out with the servants as the royal party departs. Behind you, the trays are cleared, the floors swept, the air still thick with the sense of roasted meat and honey. Ahead of you, the palace glitters, the city hums, the fields stretch into the horizon, and you think of the worker chewing his onion, the scribe with his figs, the noble with his honeycomb, the pharaoh with his goose. All Egyptians, all fed by the Nile, all beginning their day with breakfast, different in scale, different in meaning, but bound by the same cycle of hunger and survival. The palace fades behind you, its golden plates and polished courtyards still shimmering in your memory. But the Nile wind reminds you that Egypt's heartbeat is not fixed in stone walls, but in cycles, the rhythm of flood, sowing, harvest, and rest. And so your gaze shifts to the wider land, where fields ripple with grain or lie drowned under water, where the shape of breakfast itself bends with the turning of the year. What you eat in Egypt depends not just on class but on season, and every meal whispers of the river's mood. In the months of inundation, when the Nile rises and spills its muddy blessing across the fields, villages find themselves surrounded by water. Farmers cannot sow, labor shifts from ploughing to mending tools, to hauling stones for temples, to working in state projects. Breakfast in these months is heavy on what was stored from earlier harvests: dried dates, jars of salted fish, stacks of bread baked in bulk and kept as long as possible. Onions hang in bundles from rafters, garlic braids line doorways, lentils wait in clay jars. Beer is brewed constantly, the bubbling pots a comfort against the long pause in agriculture. You chew dried dates in this season, their sweetness a small reprieve from the monotony of storage foods, and you realize how important preservation was. Without it, the flood would have meant hunger instead of blessing. When the waters recede, planting begins, and breakfast takes on a different character. Fresh bread returns, the grain ground from the first harvests, its taste livelier than the stale loaves of flood months. Green shoots, leeks, lettuce, herbs find their way into morning bowls, crisp and refreshing against the heaviness of grain. You bite into one, the crunch sharp and clean, and it feels like spring itself waking your tongue. Farmers rise earlier in this season, fields demanding every hand, and breakfast becomes hurried. A hunk of bread, a handful of greens, a sip of beer, eaten quickly as the sun crests the horizon. By harvest time, breakfast grows richer again. The granaries swell, the markets burst with fruit, and households indulge in fresh figs, plump grapes, and honey stirred into warm milk. You taste it now, the sweetness almost overwhelming after months of monotony, and you understand why festivals often coincided with harvests, because abundance was not an idea, but a flavor you could actually bite into. And then there are the lean months, when stores run low, when the bread becomes harder, the beer thinner, the meal smaller. In these times, breakfast shrinks, a crust of bread dipped in water, a single onion shared among a family, beer stretched with more water than grain. The taste is weak, but it keeps you alive, and you chew slowly, pretending it fills you more than it does. Families sit quietly then, conserving energy, their eyes tired, their words few. Breakfast in the lean months is not an event, but an endurance. Here's the curious little detail. Some households mark the flood season by floating small loaves of bread on the Nile itself, offerings to ensure the waters would rise just enough, not too high, not too low. Imagine standing on the riverbank at dawn, releasing a tiny loaf, watching it bob downstream as a prayer disguised as breakfast. The act is half superstition, half science, an acknowledgement that survival depends on a force beyond control. But historians still argue about how much seasonal variation truly mattered. Some point to records of rations distributed to workers, showing consistency in bread and beer regardless of month, suggesting state systems buffered against seasonal hunger. Others insist that ordinary villagers felt the river's changes directly, their diets swinging dramatically with each stage of the year. Was Egypt's breakfast steady and unchanging? Or was it a mirror of the Nile's rhythm, abundant in one season and meager in the next? The debate stretches on, as wide and shifting as the river itself. For you, though, the rhythm is undeniable. You taste the difference between a dried fish chewed in flood season, its salt harsh and unyielding, and a fresh fig eaten at harvest, its juice running down your chin. You feel the heaviness of stale bread gnawed in lean months, and the joy of fresh loaves pulled steaming from ovens in fertile ones. Breakfast here is not static. It is a tide, ebbing and flowing with the water that defines all of Egypt. The sun climbs higher as you walk along the fields, now green with shoots, now golden with harvest, now drowned under water in your imagination. Farmers squat at the edge, chewing bread, drinking beer, watching the river, their lives bound to its cycle. And you realize that to eat in Egypt is always to listen, to the river, to the soil, to the sky. Every bite at dawn carries the weight of a season, every crumb a memory of flood or drought. You tear another piece of bread, dip it into lentils, and chew. The taste is ordinary, but behind it lies the extraordinary truth. This meal exists only because the Nile rose last season, because the fields yielded, because someone stored grain, because someone prayed with bread on the water. Breakfast is never just breakfast here. It is history in your mouth, carried forward one season at a time. The seasons have shifted in your memory, the Nile swelling and retreating, and now your path takes you away from the rhythm of planting and harvesting, toward the days when time itself bends differently. Egypt knew many mornings, but none quite like those that dawned on feast days and festivals. You can feel it the moment you wake, the hum in the air, the sound of drums carried faintly from the temples, the laughter that arrives earlier than usual in the streets. Today is not a day for onions chewed in haste or beer gulped on the way to the fields. Today is for indulgence, for joy, for a kind of breakfast that lingers long after the first bite. The villagers rise earlier than usual, but not for work. Women are busy at ovens, shaping bread into special forms. Rounder, sweeter, sometimes brushed with oil, sometimes sprinkled with sesame or shaped into little animals or deities. Children crowd around, eyes wide, waiting for the first golden loaves to be pulled from the flames. The smell alone is intoxicating. Still the nutty warmth of emmer wheat, but lifted with something brighter, sweeter. You can almost taste the joy in the air before the bread even cools. In the courtyards, men pour beer into larger jars. Not the thin morning stuff of work days, but batches brewed stronger, sweeter, sometimes with added dates for flavor. The foam rises higher, the smell richer. A jug is passed around, laughter bursting as one man takes too large a gulp and coughs, spraying foam onto his neighbors. No one scolds him. Today, mistakes are funny, not shameful. The beer itself is part of the celebration, as essential as the drums already echoing in the distance. And then come the treats that only festivals bring. Honey cakes, golden and sticky, shaped into small pyramids or round discs. Goose, roasted until the skin crackles, fat dripping into the fire with hissing pops, baskets of figs and dates piled higher than usual, sometimes even grapes or pomegranates appearing as if the gods themselves delivered them for the feast. The abundance shocks you after so many mornings of dried fish and onions. Here, tables sag under the weight of offerings, and everyone takes more than they need, because today is about plenty, not restraint. You bite into one of the honey cakes, and the sweetness explodes in your mouth. It clings to your teeth, sticks to your fingers, and drips down your wrist, but you don't care. The flavor is pure joy, a reminder that life in Egypt, though harsh, was also punctuated by moments of delirious abundance. Children run past you, their faces smeared with honey, their mouths already full of bread. Women laugh as they chase them, not with scolding, but with more food, pressing figs into their hands. The whole village feels lifted, buoyant, alive in a way that the workdays never quite allow. Still, even in celebration, food and ritual remain intertwined. In temples, priests lay out offerings at dawn: bread, beer, meat, fruit, before statues of gods. Later, much of that food is carried back out, distributed to the people. What was divine becomes human, what was sacred becomes shared. You find yourself eating not just for hunger but as part of something larger, a cycle that ties the living and the divine together through flavor and ritual. And here's where the quirky detail appears. On certain feast days, people baked bread dyed red with ochre, a symbolic gesture linked to myths of destruction and renewal. Imagine biting into a loaf tinted the color of blood, not with malice, but with reverence. A reminder of the god's power to destroy and to protect. Children would laugh at the strange color, daring each other to take bigger bites, while the elders chewed with quiet respect. Breakfast became not only sustenance, not only pleasure, but storytelling you could taste. Yet scholars debate how wide this abundance truly spread. Did every villager feast like this on festival mornings? Or were these rich breakfasts confined mostly to temples and noble households? Some argue that state provisions flowed freely on holidays, ensuring even the poorest could taste honey and goose at least once a year. Others caution that evidence is exaggerated, that many still made do with bread and beer, while only the privileged truly feasted. Was Egypt's festival morning a universal banquet? Or was it, like so much else, a display of inequality hidden beneath the drums? The question lingers unanswered, the truth probably lying somewhere in the middle, carried on the smoke of roasting geese. For now, though, you eat as they eat. You tear another piece of sweetened bread, sip the stronger beer, pop a fig into your mouth, and let the honey coat your tongue. The music rises, drums and flutes weaving into a rhythm that vibrates in your chest. The sun glitters brighter than usual, its heat softened by laughter, its weight lifted by joy. And for this morning at least, breakfast feels like celebration, a rebellion against monotony, a feast for both the stomach and the spirit. The festival air thickens as the morning stretches on, and you realize that breakfast here is not bound by the clock. On ordinary days, the meal would have ended quickly, workers already trudging to the fields, scribes to their benches, nobles to their accounts. But during festivals, the boundaries blur. People linger at their bowls and trays, laughter stretching the meal into hours. Every bite another excuse to stay at the table. Musicians wander the lanes now, their flutes bright and insistent, their drums steady and deep. With every beat, children dance, clutching pieces of bread in their fists, crumbs scattering into the dust as they spin. You see a boy balancing a honey cake on his head, wobbling dramatically until it falls, and the crowd erupts with cheers and laughter. Another child picks it up, wipes it on his tunic and eats it anyway, grinning defiantly as the adults clap along to the music. It is not just eating, it is theatre. Food as entertainment, as shared delight. Women pass by carrying trays of roasted goose, the smell intoxicating. The fat glistens on the brown skin, dripping down onto bread laid beneath to soak up the juices. One woman tears off a piece, pops it into her mouth, and lets out a laugh that draws others to her tray. Hands reach in, bread vanishes, grease coats fingers. You take your share, and the taste nearly overwhelms you. Rich, savory, smoky, the opposite of the raw onion sharpness that had once made you cough. It is indulgence that sits heavy, yes, but deliciously so, and you lick your fingers without shame. Nearby, elders gather in a circle, sipping stronger beer from shared jars. Their conversations drift between jokes and memories, but you notice how reverent they grow when they speak of the gods. To them, This food is not only celebration, but blessing, proof that the deities are generous. A loaf dyed red is passed around, its strange hue a reminder of old myths. One elder holds it up, recounting the tale of how the goddess Sekhmet was tricked into drinking beer-colored red to look like blood, saving humanity from her wrath. Everyone laughs, but the bread is eaten solemnly, each bite a nod to the story, each crumb part of the ritual. And here's where you see something unusual. Families bring small loaves wrapped carefully in cloth, carry them to the temple steps, and leave them there as offerings before joining the feasting crowds. Some loaves are plain, some shaped like animals, some smeared with honey. The priests collect them, place them at the feet of statues, and later, as the festival wanes, redistribute them back into the village. The bread makes a circle, offered, blessed, consumed, binding human and divine with the simplest of foods. The debate arises in your mind even as you chew. Was this redistribution truly generous, feeding everyone equally? Or did the wealthier households always receive back more than they gave? Some argue the records of temple accounts show fairness, a balance carefully maintained. Others insist the system favored elites, with commoners seeing little of the sacred loaves returned. As you watch a servant carry a full basket away from the temple, trailed by a family that looks far too well dressed to be hungry, you wonder which version is closer to the truth. Still, as the morning stretches toward midday, you cannot deny the spirit of abundance. The tables remain full, music rises, voices carry. Goosebones litter the ground, breadcrumbs crunch underfoot, honey sticks to fingertips and faces alike. No one hurries, no one scolds, no one worries about the fields or the quarries or the accounts. For this day, the first meal is not a prelude to labor, but a climax in itself. You bite again into honey cake, sip more beer, and close your eyes as the drumbeat pulses in your chest. The food is heavy now, your stomach full to the point of ache. But you keep eating, because that is what everyone around you does. Because joy tastes better when shared. Because plenty is fleeting, and no one knows when the next feast will come. When finally the music shifts to slower rhythms, and the sun stands higher in the sky, families begin to drift away from the tables. Some stagger slightly, beer heavy in their bellies. Children clutch the last of their figs, sticky with juice. Women gather leftover loaves, wrap them in cloth, and tuck them under their arms for later. The festival morning begins to fade into festival afternoon, but its mark lingers in the sweetness still on your tongue, the grease still on your fingers, the laughter still echoing in your ears. This breakfast has been more than sustenance. It has been communion, between neighbors, between families, between people and gods. And as you walk away from the feast, your stomach heavy but your spirit strangely light, you understand that in Egypt, even breakfast could be transformed into a celebration of life itself. The echoes of festival drums still hum faintly in your bones. But as the laughter fades and the village returns to its rhythm, your eyes are drawn once more to the river. The Nile, broad and gleaming, stretches into the horizon like a sheet of hammered bronze. Boats slide across its surface, their sails puffed with wind, their decks stacked with baskets and jars. If Egypt's fields were the body, the river was its veins, carrying lifeblood in the form of trade. And that trade often spilled directly into breakfast bowls. You stand on the dock as a vessel creaks into port. Its crew leaps onto the planks, shouting greetings, securing ropes, unloading crates. The air is suddenly thick with scents not entirely Egyptian. Spices sharp and unfamiliar. Fruits that gleam with colors richer than local orchards could produce. Jars sealed with foreign markings. Breakfast in this land was usually grounded in bread, beer, onions and figs. But on days like these, the morning could take on flavors from far beyond the Nile's banks. Take the pomegranate, for example. Though cultivated in Egypt, many were brought by traders from farther east. Their skins leathery, their insides bursting with ruby seeds. A woman buys one from the dock, cracks it open with a practiced twist, and her children swarm around, scooping seeds with sticky fingers. You taste a handful, and the sharpness jolts your tongue awake, tart and sweet all at once. It feels different from figs and dates, less mellow, more electric, like a spark hidden in fruit. Then there are almonds, their shells cracked open to reveal pale, delicate nuts. You crunch one, its flavor subtler than the raw bite of onion or the sweetness of honey. They are expensive, of course, and rare, but in wealthier households they make their way into breakfast bowls, sprinkled atop bread or eaten plain. Imagine the pride of serving guests a tray of almonds at dawn, a clear signal that you have connections stretching across deserts. And wine, always wine. While Egyptians brewed beer daily, wine was more often imported, particularly in earlier centuries, before vineyards spread widely in the delta. It carried with it the flavor of foreign soil, of trade routes guarded fiercely, of jars carried on camelback and boat deck. To sip it in the morning, diluted and cooled, was to taste more than grapes. It was to taste empire. You swallow a mouthful now, and though the sourness makes you wince slightly, you recognize its role as both refreshment and status. Here's the quirky sight that makes you smile. Dried fish packed into jars of brine, shipped long distances, sold at markets far from the Nile. Workers in distant oases, far from the river's daily gift, could still taste its bounty through trade. Imagine chewing a piece of salted fish for breakfast in the desert, its flavor harsh but grounding, carrying with it the memory of water hundreds of miles away. Food was not only nourishment but geography condensed, distance bridged in every bite. Still, the question remains, how common were these imported flavors at the breakfast table? Some scholars argue that most Egyptians, especially in villages, rarely saw them, their meals unchanged for generations. Bread, beer, onions, lentils, dates. Others suggest that trade was more widespread than we imagine, that even modest households occasionally tasted pomegranates or foreign nuts, if only during certain seasons. Was Egyptian breakfast mostly local and unchanging? Or was it already global in subtle ways? The evidence sways both directions, the truth as fluid as the river that carried those goods. For you, though, standing on the dock and biting into another pomegranate seed, the answer hardly matters. You taste the foreign mingled with the familiar, and it feels right. The Nile does not end at Egypt's borders. It pulls the world into its current, carrying flavors, scents, and textures that fold seamlessly into Egyptian mornings. The market near the docks is alive with this mingling of flavors, and as the morning grows, you wander deeper into its chaos. Traders shout, holding up jars of honey darker than local harvests, imported from lands where bees fed on blossoms unfamiliar to Egyptian soil. Women pause to taste, dipping fingers, licking the sticky sweetness, comparing it to their own golden jars. Some shake their heads, preferring the taste of home. Others smile, delighted by the difference. Breakfast, it seems, was a place where loyalty and curiosity often clashed. You pass another stall stacked with flat cakes, pressed with dried figs and sprinkled with sesame. The seller insists they are baked with flour from Syria, finer than any in Egypt. His words are salesmanship, but the cakes are good, chewy and rich, the sesame adding a nutty bite that lingers. You buy one, chew slowly, and realize how trade didn't just add new foods, it reshaped old ones, layering familiar bread and fruit with foreign accents until something entirely new emerged. Children run between the stalls, snatching whatever they can, an almond here, a grape there. One boy carries a fig cake in his fist, grinning as he licks sesame seeds from his palm. His mother chases him, laughing, scolding lightly but not too harshly. After all, it is a festival-like day whenever the ships come in. For them, trade days meant rare luxuries at breakfast, flavors otherwise only dreamed of. Nearby, a scribe sits at a small table, writing down tallies for the dockmaster. His breakfast lies beside him, a simple loaf, a cup of beer, but tucked at the edge is a single pomegranate, cracked open, its seeds spilling like jewels. Even those who lived on lists and numbers could not resist the temptation of the river's gifts. He pops a seed into his mouth between calculations, staining the papyrus with red juice, though he does not notice. And you catch sight of a priest moving among the traders, selecting jars of oil, baskets of grapes, loaves baked with foreign flour. These will be carried back to the temple, transformed into offerings. It is not only households that taste trade at breakfast, but the gods themselves, who receive figs from afar, wines pressed in foreign soil, cakes spiced with herbs unfamiliar to local tongues. For the Egyptians, the divine also dined on imports. The debate lingers, though, whispered even among scholars today. Did trade truly transform the average breakfast, or did it mostly enrich the tables of nobles, priests, and merchants? Perhaps most villagers lived their lives with bread and beer unchanged, tasting pomegranates only once in a lifetime. Or perhaps the Nile's openness made even the humblest morning more varied than we give it credit for. The uncertainty hangs like incense smoke refusing to settle. As the sun climbs higher, the dock begins to quiet. Traders pack their goods. Buyers carry baskets home. Children gnaw stolen grapes as they run through alleys. In the houses that line the river, breakfast unfolds with new flavors. Bread dipped in foreign oil, figs stuffed with almonds, pomegranates torn open and shared. And though the staples remain, bread, beer, onions, the imports fold themselves seamlessly into the rhythm of the morning, like new notes added to an old song. You sit at the water's edge, a fig cake in one hand, pomegranate seeds staining your fingers, and you watch the river glisten. Its current carries not only silt and water, but the flavors of worlds beyond. To eat breakfast here is to taste Egypt, yes, but also to taste the reach of its river, the breadth of its empire, the whispers of lands far away, all condensed into the first meal of the day. The markets quiet down. The ships sail off with their empty baskets. And you turn your steps back into the villages where Egypt's heart beats in simpler rhythm. Here, away from the spectacle of nobles and pharaohs, breakfast is not about imported luxuries or ritual offerings. It is about survival, about getting enough strength to push a plow or carry water jars before the sun grows merciless. And yet, even in these humble homes, the first meal carries stories worth lingering over. The mudbrick houses crouch low, their walls warm with the first rays of light. Smoke drifts lazily from ovens built into the courtyards, where women bend over grinding stones, shoulders straining as they crush emmer wheat into coarse flour. The sound is steady, like a heartbeat, stone against stone, grain turned into powder. The flour will be mixed with water, shaped into rough loaves, baked against the oven's inner walls. Some will puff, others will blacken, all will be eaten. Bread is life, and even the poorest have at least this to start the day. The men sit on reed mats, their tools already beside them, hoes, baskets, ropes. A bowl is placed in the center, a lentil mash, thick and brown, flavored only with salt if they're lucky. They tear bread, dip it, chew quickly. The lentils are earthy, heavy, filling enough to keep the stomach from gnawing for a few hours. Beside the bowl sits a jug of beer, cloudy and sour, its foam already starting to settle. They drink from shared cups, passing them around, each sip quick and practical. No ceremony, no chatter, only the sound of chewing and swallowing, the rustle of mats, the creak of sandals being tied. Children too take part, though their portions are smaller. One boy gnaws at a crust too hard for his teeth, soaking it in beer before trying again. His sister laughs, stealing his softened piece, until their mother swats at both with the edge of her shawl. They squeal but keep eating because there is no time to waste. The fields call, the animals stir, and breakfast is only a pause before endless labor. And yet, in these plain meals, there is resilience. The onions they chew raw may make their eyes water, but they believe the sting keeps illness away. A garlic clove passed between them doubles as food and medicine, chewed fiercely before trudging into the dust. They joke half seriously that the smell itself will scare away evil spirits. You bite into one now, and the sharpness nearly overwhelms you, but you feel the heat spread through your chest, a crude comfort against the day ahead. Here's the small, almost tender detail you notice. Families often saved the softest piece of bread for the eldest or the youngest, a quiet gesture of respect or care in an otherwise harsh morning. Imagine a grandmother, toothless and slow, smiling as she's handed a piece dipped in lentils, softer than the rest, or a toddler given the inside of a loaf, its crumb easier to chew. These small choices turn survival into something gentler, reminding you that even hunger leaves room for love. But historians still wrestle with the question, how much food did the poor truly have, and how secure was it? Some argue that state systems, through rations and granaries, ensured stability for workers even in lean times. Others believe scarcity was constant, with peasants often on the edge of hunger, their breakfasts little more than crumbs and water. Was the ordinary Egyptian morning steady and predictable, or was it fraught with uncertainty? The debate echoes like the grinding stones, never fully resolved. You chew another bite of coarse bread, lentils sticking to your teeth, beer sour on your tongue. It is not luxurious, not even pleasant, but it is filling. And as the family rises, brushing crumbs from their laps, hoisting tools over their shoulders, you understand that this is what sustained Egypt. Not honey cakes, not imported almonds, but bread, lentils, onions, and grit. The kind of breakfast that builds pyramids silently, one bite at a time. The village stirs fully awake now, and you follow the families as they spill into the lanes. The smell of smoke clings to their tunics, the onion sharpness still hot on their breath, the heaviness of lentils sitting in their bellies. Their sandals slap against the packed earth, raising dust that sparkles faintly in the slanted morning light. Breakfast has ended, but its traces follow them, crumbs on their sleeves, beer foam still clinging to the rims of clay cups left behind. At the communal ovens, women continue baking, their arms and backs aching but steady. The line never truly ends. One family retrieves their loaves as another kneads dough, a cycle as endless as the Nile's flood. A boy lingers nearby, too small to work the fields, but old enough to carry trays of bread. He takes a loaf still hot from the oven, its crust blistering his fingers, and bites before anyone can stop him. His grin shines through the steam, his cheeks bulging with too big a mouthful. The women laugh but allow it. Even here, in the midst of survival, joy sneaks through in stolen bites. You wander into another courtyard, where an elderly man sits on a reed stool. His breakfast is modest, half a loaf, softened in water, and a handful of garlic cloves spread before him. He peels each clove slowly, bites deliberately, chews with patience. His neighbors tease him for eating so much garlic, but he insists it keeps his joints loose and his breath strong enough to ward off both illness and demons. He laughs at his own joke, his toothless grin glowing in the morning light. You taste a clove alongside him, the fire racing through your mouth, and you realize how much belief can transform bitterness into comfort. Nearby, a mother rocks her infant with one arm while eating with the other, dipping bread into lentil mash. She chews quickly, then softens a piece with beer, before pressing it gently into the baby's mouth. The child fusses, then swallows, and the mother smiles. Breakfast here is never private. It is shared, passed from hand to hand, bite to bite, one mouth feeding another. Still, the scarcity shows. A man finishes his portion quickly and eyes the bowl longingly, though it is already empty. His wife shakes her head, reminding him with a glance that there will be nothing more until night. He sighs, ties his rope belt tighter, and rises. Hunger, you realize, is not always absence. It is sometimes the awareness that what you've eaten will not last long enough. This is what scholars still puzzle over. Did these villagers live in constant want, or was their diet sufficient for the lives they led? The granaries suggest abundance, yet skeletal remains show signs of malnutrition. Perhaps the truth lies in rhythm. Plenty during harvest, leanness in the months before flood, a seesaw of feast and scarcity that defined every household. Each breakfast was both reassurance and reminder, a fragile moment between hunger past and hunger to come. As the workers head into the fields, their chatter grows louder, their laughter masking fatigue. They carry the smell of garlic and beer into the open land, their stomachs heavy enough to endure the first hours of heat. Children chase after them, carrying smaller baskets, skipping across the dust. Women remain behind to grind more grain, prepare the next meal, tend to the animals. The cycle repeats, but the memory of breakfast lingers, even as sweat begins to bead on brows. You pause at the edge of the fields, watching them bend to their work. Behind you, the village ovens still smoke. In your mouth, the taste of coarse bread and onions still clings. And you understand with clarity, these are the breakfasts that built a civilization. Not gilded trays, not festival goose, not the honey of pharaohs, but the stubborn, earthy meals of those who labored with their hands and carried Egypt on their backs. The sun has begun to climb higher, and already the heat presses down like a weight. The workers in the fields bend to their hoes, the scribes hunch over their scrolls, the nobles retreat into shaded courtyards. But scattered throughout this land are others whose mornings look different. Travelers and soldiers, men on the move, whose breakfast must be eaten not at home or temple, but wherever duty or distance has carried them. To follow them is to see breakfast stripped of comfort, turned into something portable, hurried, but still carrying the essence of Egypt in every bite. The caravan gathers at dawn, camels grumbling, donkeys braying, drivers shouting as they load baskets and jars, merchants heading east, emissaries bound for Nubia, soldiers escorting goods. It does not matter. The journey will be long, and breakfast must be eaten before the road swallows the day. A boy hands out loaves to each traveler, smaller and harder than those baked for homes, designed to last. They are dense, almost stone-like, packed tightly so they do not crumble in saddlebags. You tear at one with your teeth, and it resists stubbornly, each chew a workout. It is not pleasant, but it fills the mouth and eventually the stomach. Beside you, another traveler chews dried fish, salted to the point of burning his lips. He laughs through his grimace, washing it down with a gulp of beer carried in a clay jug. The beer is thin, sloshing in the heat, but it softens the bread, makes the salt bearable. A soldier tears his bread in half, tucks one piece into his belt, and eats the other in silence. His breakfast is not ritual or pleasure. It is strategy, measured and rationed, designed to last the miles ahead. You notice how these meals are eaten standing, leaning, moving. No mats are spread, no bowls shared. The food is clutched in fists, stuffed into mouths between commands and preparations. A man shouts for his camel to kneel even as he bites an onion, his words muffled, his eyes watering from the sting. Another tucks dates into his pouch, quick energy for the road. Their syrup sticking to his fingers as he pulls at reins. Breakfast is chaos here, loud and urgent, tied to the rhythm of departure rather than the quiet of dawn. And then comes a curious detail. Soldiers sometimes carried small bags of roasted chickpeas, crunchy and nutty, easy to chew while marching. You reach into one of these pouches, pop a handful into your mouth, and feel how they snap between your teeth, leaving a dusty film on your tongue. They taste simple, but they are light, portable, enduring, the perfect soldier's food. The man who shares them with you grins proudly, insisting they will keep him strong until sunset. Yet the question lingers. How much variety did these traveling meals truly have? Some argue soldiers and caravans carried only the barest staples: bread, dried fish, onions, beer. Others suggest the state supplied more generously, including dried fruits, legumes, and even small cakes. Was breakfast on the road a monotony of toughness and salt, or was it, at times, surprisingly diverse? The truth remains blurred by sand and centuries, debated as fiercely as a soldier clutching the last date in his pouch. Still, as the caravan begins to move, you taste what they taste. Hard bread softened by beer, fish too salty to enjoy but strong enough to preserve, chickpeas roasted dry, onions sharp enough to wake even the most exhausted. The sun climbs, the road stretches, and breakfast here becomes not an anchor of comfort, but a weapon against distance and fatigue. The caravan finally lurches forward, the line of camels swaying like ships on a golden sea of sand. Dust rises in clouds, catching in your throat, mixing with the salt of the fish you ate earlier. The men around you chew slowly, conserving both food and strength. Every bite matters here. A date pulled from a pouch, a sip of lukewarm beer from a clay jug, a scrap of bread softened in water. They are rationed with care, parceled out like treasure. Breakfast is no longer an event but a calculation, every mouthful weighed against the miles ahead. As the sun climbs higher, the soldiers at the caravan's edge tighten their belts. One pulls out an onion, bites into it raw, and the smell spreads quickly, pungent enough to sting your nose. He laughs at your grimace, offering you a piece. You take it, chew reluctantly, and feel the sharpness cut through the dryness of your mouth. The soldier winks. Onions may make the eyes water, but they make the belly stronger. Superstition and practicality blur here, each bite both food and protection. A group of younger men munch on roasted chickpeas as they march, passing the pouch back and forth like children sharing sweets. They crunch loudly, their laughter ringing across the desert. One pretends to count the chickpeas like a scribe tallying grain, then gobbles them before anyone can stop him. Even in the grit of travel, humor finds a way. You pop a handful yourself, the dry powder coating your tongue, and realize how these little morsels lighten more than hunger. They lighten spirit. Later, when the caravan halts briefly, men squat in the sand and unwrap bundles. Inside are flat cakes pressed with dried fruit, hardened by time but still edible. They break them with knives, chew in silence. These cakes, you learn, are meant to last days, but many cannot resist finishing them early, savoring the rare sweetness. You break off a piece, taste the dense mixture of fig and flour, and feel how, even in harsh journeys, Egyptians carried comfort disguised as food. And here's a detail that makes you pause. Jars of water mixed with a little sour beer are passed around, not only to drink but to dip bread into. The mixture softens the crust, makes it easier to chew, turns something hard into something bearable. Watching men soak their rations in this thin brew, you realize that ingenuity often made the difference between nourishment and misery. A trick as simple as dipping bread became a lifeline on the road. But scholars debate whether these soldiers and travelers lived on rations too meager to sustain them. or whether the state's logistical system ensured a surprising degree of provision. Some claim evidence of organized supply lines, bread baked in bulk, jars of beer and water distributed carefully, even dried fruits packed for long journeys. Others suggest the reality was grimmer, the rations barely enough, men often hungry and forced to forage. Were these mornings steady with planned food, or were they always precarious, dependent on luck and improvisation? The argument continues, as unresolved as the shifting desert wind. The caravan moves again, dust swirling, sun blazing, bellies heavy, but not satisfied. You march with them, the taste of salt, onion and stale bread still clinging to your mouth. Breakfast has given strength, but only just enough to carry you forward, step after step, mile after mile. And as the horizon stretches endlessly, you understand why the Egyptians built their mornings not for pleasure, but for endurance. Out here, every crumb is survival, every sip a prayer. The desert dust of the caravan still lingers in your throat when you step into another world entirely. The still, shaded courtyards of the scribal schools. Here, the noise of soldiers and merchants fades, replaced by the scratch of reed pens on papyrus, the murmured recitation of lessons, the sharp claps of a teacher correcting a mistake. Yet even in this world of ink and numbers, breakfast shapes the rhythm of the morning. To write for hours requires fuel as surely as hauling stones or marching through sand. And the young scribes learn this lesson quickly. At dawn, the apprentices gather, reed baskets in hand. Some carry tablets, others jars of ink. But tucked among these tools are small bundles of food wrapped in cloth. Bread, always bread, but lighter than the dense loaves of workers. Finer flour, sifted more carefully, baked softer. The boys sit cross-legged on mats in the courtyard, their voices rising and falling as they repeat hieroglyphs, while their hands tear bread absent-mindedly, dipping it into bowls of mashed beans or lentils. The food is plain, but it keeps their bellies steady as they prepare to spend the day bent over lines of text. One boy unwraps a fig from his cloth, bites into it, and the seeds crunch between his teeth. Another chews dates, syrup sticking to his fingers until he licks them clean before picking up his pen again. A few sip beer from small jars, though watered heavily, the liquid more for hydration than indulgence. The mixture of smells, grain, fruit, ink, and sweat fills the air, a strange harmony that marks the morning of a school not with silence, but with sustenance. The master scribe sits apart, his breakfast laid out more neatly. Bread finer still, perhaps sweetened with honey, a cup of diluted wine instead of beer, its aroma sharper, its taste more refined. He eats slowly, his eyes scanning the boys, his voice cutting sharply whenever a line falters. Even in the act of eating, his authority shows. While the boys chew quickly, nervously he savors, reminding them that knowledge, like food, requires patience. Here's a curious little glimpse into this world. When ink ran low, some scribes would moisten their reed pens with beer rather than water, believing it clung better to the fibers. Imagine dipping your pen into the same drink you sipped with your bread. Your notes stained not only with ink, but faintly scented of sour brew. The boys giggle at this, daring each other to try, until the master scowls and they return to their lines. Breakfast, even here, finds its way into their tools. But the question remains, how much better were these scribal meals than those of the farmers and builders? Some argue scribes, elevated by their literacy, ate finer breads, sweeter fruits, richer drinks, their mornings closer to nobles than peasants. Others counter that scribes, though respected, were still state employees. Their meals little different from the average villagers, their bread sometimes just as coarse. Were their breakfasts symbols of privilege, or simply echoes of common fare? The evidence remains tangled, the answer shifting like ink blotted by a careless hand. For now, though, you taste what they taste. You chew bread soft enough to leave no grit between your teeth, mash lentils that sit heavy but steady in your stomach, sip beer watered until it is little more than cloudy liquid. Around you, boys whisper lessons as they eat, their mouths full of both food and syllables, their lives bound to both grain and ink. The sun rises higher, shadows stretch across the courtyard, and breakfast here becomes not indulgence nor survival, but preparation for the endless patience of writing Egypt into memory. The courtyard grows warmer as the morning advances, and the rhythm of the scribal school settles into its steady hum. Papyrus sheets are unrolled, ink pots placed carefully on reed mats, and the boys bend over their lessons with furrowed brows. Yet breakfast still lingers around them, the smell of bread crusts, the sticky sheen of date syrup on fingers, the faint sourness of beer spilled onto mats. Food and learning are inseparable here, as though one fuels the other, each bite of bread giving shape to the lines of hieroglyphs scratched onto papyrus. A young boy pauses mid-line, his stomach grumbling, and sneaks a fig from his pouch. He eats it quickly, seeds crunching, before returning to his work, hoping the master does not notice. Another dips a crust of bread into watered beer, softening it so he can chew more easily, then wipes his mouth with the back of his hand before pressing on with his writing. Their small rebellions remind you that even in the discipline of scholarship, hunger finds its way. The master himself finishes the last of his honeyed bread, brushes the crumbs from his robe, and calls for recitation. His voice is firm, his belly full enough to grant him patience, though not endless. He sips diluted wine and the cup glitters in the light. The boys glance at it, envious. For them, wine is rare, a drink reserved for better days or higher ranks. The contrast between teacher and student is clear, even at the table. Here you see a telling detail. One boy, too poor to bring fruit, chews only bread, his crust hard and plain. A neighbor breaks his own fig in half and offers it without a word. The boy accepts, his eyes brightening as he tastes sweetness he would not have known that morning otherwise. Breakfast, even in poverty, becomes an exchange of kindness, a reminder that learning binds them as much as hunger divides them. Debates linger among scholars today about the exact conditions of these schools. Were the apprentices fed by the institutions, receiving rations of bread, beer, and beans as part of their training? Or were they expected to bring food from home, their breakfasts shaped entirely by family wealth? Some argue that the state supported them, ensuring even poor boys could rise through literacy. Others believe the system favored the privileged, with food as another barrier keeping opportunity limited. The evidence remains fragmented, like broken shards of pottery, leaving the truth half told. Still, as you sit in the courtyard, nibbling the last crusts alongside the boys, you sense the quiet determination in their chewing. Every bite swallowed fuels another line of text, another tally of grain, another hymn to the gods. Their breakfast may be modest, but their purpose is immense. Bread and lentils may not sparkle like honeycomb or roasted goose, but they steady the hand that writes laws, hymns, and stories that will endure for millennia. The lesson continues, voices rising in unison, the hum of ink and grain merging into one. You rise, wiping crumbs from your lap, and step out into the sunlight. Behind you, the boys keep writing, their bellies steadied by breakfast, their hands blackened with ink, their voices carrying the weight of Egypt's memory forward. The murmur of scribal schools fades behind you, and now the road bends towards spaces where walls rise higher and shadows fall heavier. The houses of women who, though seldom painted large in history, shaped the mornings of Egypt just as surely as pharaohs and priests. Step into a courtyard where the first light slants across woven baskets, where daughters grind grain beside their mothers, where breakfast is not only eaten but orchestrated by female hands. Here the hum of work begins before the men stir. Women kneel at grinding stones, rhythm steady, their arms moving in long, practiced arcs. The air fills with the dusty scent of crushed emmer, clinging to skin, seeping into hair. A girl no older than 10 takes her turn, shoulders shaking with the effort, her face set with determination. Beside her, her mother kneads dough, shaping rough loaves that will become the family's first and last meal of the day. Bread is their burden and their gift, and without their labor, the household would starve before noon. The food itself is plain. Bread, a bowl of beans, perhaps garlic mashed with oil if fortune allows. Yet the way it is served carries tenderness. A mother dips bread into the beans first, softens it with her own hand, then presses it into her child's palm. Another sets aside the choicest fig for her eldest daughter, who will need strength for weaving later. These gestures may seem small, but they weave love into survival, and you can feel it in the way the children smile, even as they chew quickly. One woman carries a jug of beer across the courtyard, pouring carefully into small cups so that each family member drinks in turn. She laughs when foam spills over, wiping her child's chin with the edge of her dress. The beer is cloudy, sour, not a luxury, but a constant, and she ensures no one is left out, not even the toddler who receives a sip thinned with water. Breakfast here is equalizer and anchor, a space where the family gathers before dispersing into labor. Yet there is another layer too, ritual. Some women, before serving, set aside a portion of bread or beans, placing it near the doorway or on a small household shrine. It is an offering to household gods, to ancestors, a quiet assurance that the day will pass without misfortune. You watch as one woman breaks off a piece of bread, lays it gently on a reed tray before a figurine of Taweret, and whispers a prayer. The act is swift, almost invisible, but you realize breakfast is not only about bodies, it is about spirits. Here's a curious detail whispered among neighbors. Certain women smeared bread with herbs or honey, not just for flavor, but as charms, believing specific foods could protect their children from sickness or misfortune. Imagine a mother carefully rubbing honey across a crust, insisting it would sweeten her child's fate as well as her mouth. The children lick their fingers happily, unaware of the prayer hidden in the act. But the question remains, how much choice did women truly have in shaping these meals? Some argue they exercised immense control within the home, turning modest stores into sustaining breakfasts, ensuring survival through ingenuity. Others suggest their labor was so bound by scarcity and duty that creativity was limited, their mornings defined by repetition and exhaustion rather than expression. Were these breakfasts acts of agency, or were they the quiet endurance of necessity? The truth, like so much in Egypt, lies in the tension between both. You chew bread alongside them now, dipped in beans, flavored with garlic, and though the taste is humble, you sense its weight. It is the taste of care pressed into labor, of mornings shaped not by spectacle, but by steady hands. The courtyard buzzes with voices, laughter, even arguments, but through it all, the rhythm of feeding remains constant. The pulse of Egypt carried forward by women who rarely appear in tomb paintings, but without whom no field would be tilled, no pyramid built, no scroll written. The courtyard hums brighter as the sun climbs, and the rhythm of breakfast deepens into something more layered. You notice how the act of feeding extends beyond family. Neighbors drift through gates, trading small portions, sharing what they can spare. A woman offers her neighbor a handful of lentils. In return, she receives 2 onions. These exchanges are quiet contracts, binding households together through the meal that starts the day. Food becomes both sustenance and social glue, a language spoken without words. Children, their bellies half full, turn breakfast into a game. One girl plucks the soft inside from a loaf, rolls it between her palms into a ball, and tosses it to her brother. He catches it, grins, and pops it straight into his mouth, chewing as the others laugh. Another child dips bread into a cup of watered beer, wrinkling his nose at the sourness, but drinking anyway. Their mother scolds gently, but the laughter lingers, a reminder that even in hardship, mornings could hold mischief. Elderly women sit to one side, eating slowly, their portions softened with liquid so their weak teeth can manage. One hums as she chews, an old lullaby that drifts across the courtyard, half-forgotten words blending with the crunch of grain. Younger women glance at her with fondness, perhaps remembering their own mothers singing the same tune. Breakfast here is layered with memory, each bite carrying echoes of generations before. And then you see another curious detail. Some women sprinkle dried herbs over bread, not only for taste but as small medicines. A pinch of coriander here, a leaf of mint there. Nothing extravagant, but enough to soothe a stomach, enough to feel like protection against the day. One mother insists that chewing a sprig of mint in the morning cools the body before the heat grows fierce. Her daughter protests, wrinkling her nose, but obeys. The herb leaves its green trace on her tongue as she chews dutifully. The question lingers, though. How much of this was tradition, and how much was necessity? Were women truly crafting recipes, or were they improvising endlessly with what little they had? Some scholars argue women were the keepers of culinary knowledge, passing down methods that made even coarse bread more palatable. Others counter that they were locked into scarcity, their breakfast shaped by the grindstone more than by choice. Perhaps the truth lies in both. Duty and ingenuity intertwined, every loaf born from necessity, but flavored with creativity where it could be found. As the morning stretches, the men gather their tools, the children scatter toward chores, and the women remain behind to clean, to grind more grain, to prepare for the next meal. The echoes of breakfast fade, but its impact lingers. The lentil mash that steadied hands, the garlic that warmed stomachs, the bread that filled mouths enough to carry the family into labor. You step back into the lane, the sounds of other courtyards merging into a chorus. Grinding stones, children's laughter, the soft hum of lullabies. And you realize that in these modest breakfasts, women carried the true weight of Egypt's mornings, not with gilded trays or feasts, but with quiet endurance, with hands that fed not only bodies but also the fragile hope that each day would be survived, and perhaps even shared with a smile. The courtyards of women dissolve behind you, their rhythms of grinding stones and children's chatter fading into memory. And now you find yourself moving toward the youngest of Egypt's mornings. Here, in the small figures of children, breakfast takes on another shape entirely. Lighter, gentler, and often improvised by mothers who balanced both nourishment and necessity. To see a child's first meal of the day is to glimpse both innocence and fragility, bound together in each softened crumb. The scene is simple. A mother tears bread into tiny pieces, soaks them in goat's milk, and presses the softened morsels into her child's hand. The little one fumbles, smearing more across cheeks than into the mouth, but eventually swallows, smiling at the taste. Milk is rare, often kept for the very young, and the effort to share it at breakfast shows the careful choices parents made. To waste even a drop would be unthinkable, but to deny a child would be harsher still. You watch the child lick at the last white traces, and it feels like a small victory before the day begins. Older children eat more like their parents, though in smaller portions. A boy gnaws at the crust of a loaf too tough for his teeth, his mother softening it with watered beer before handing it back. His younger sister clutches a fig, the sticky sweetness dripping down her wrists as she giggles with delight. The bread fills their bellies, but it is the fruit that lights their faces, proof that sweetness was always rare enough to be cherished. You notice a curious detail. Sometimes children's breakfasts were marked by small rituals of protection. A mother might rub garlic lightly on a child's forehead before handing him a clove to chew, insisting it kept evil spirits away. Another might tuck a date into her daughter's pouch as both food and charm, believing its syrup carried blessing as well as energy. These gestures blur the line between nourishment and spell, feeding not just body, but soul. The sounds of children's mornings carry a different tone than those of adults. Where men chewed silently and women hummed lullabies, children turned breakfast into noise. Laughter, squeals, arguments over who gets the bigger fig. They chase one another through the courtyard, with bread clutched in fists, crumbs scattering like grain across the ground. Their mothers scold gently, but even the scolding carries a smile. Here, breakfast is both chaos and comfort, a moment before the discipline of chores sets in. Yet the question remains, how plentiful were children's meals in truth? Some scholars argue that Egyptian households ensured the youngest ate first, protecting them against scarcity. Others suggest children often bore the brunt of hunger, their portions smallest, their bellies emptiest. The bones of excavated children reveal both malnutrition and resilience, painting a picture both tender and harsh. Were children cherished with the choicest morsels, or did they scrape by with softened crusts and shared sips of beer? The truth flickers uncertainly, like the morning light shifting across a courtyard. You taste their breakfasts now, bread softened in milk, figs sticky and sweet, garlic sharp enough to sting, and you realize how much these modest meals mattered, how much care was poured into them. They are not feasts, but they carry love disguised as food, survival wrapped in sweetness, faith folded into each bite, and in the laughter of the children, you hear Egypt's mornings echoing forward, as enduring as the grind of stones or the rush of the Nile. The courtyard fills with sunlight, and the chaos of children's breakfasts spills into every corner. A girl tugs at her brother's loaf, declaring she has the right to the bigger piece. He clutches it tighter, only to drop it into the dust. Their mother sighs, wipes it clean with the edge of her dress, and hands it back. Bread is too precious to waste, even when it has kissed the ground. The children keep chewing, laughter rising again, their quarrel forgotten in the sweetness of a fig passed between them. An older boy tries to act grown, gulping down beer watered thin, but he coughs at the sourness, spraying droplets across the mat. The younger ones howl with laughter, and even his father chuckles before ruffling his hair. The boy wipes his mouth, cheeks burning with embarrassment, yet the lesson is learned. Beer may be a staple, but its taste is not so easily claimed by a child. You sip from the same jug and feel its faint fizz and sour tang, and you wonder how many Egyptian children grew into adulthood with this as their morning drink, as normal as milk is today. Nearby, A grandmother cradles the youngest, feeding him softened bread from her own hand. She sings as she works, a low melody that quiets the baby's fussing. The tune carries words older than memory, perhaps half prayer, half lullaby, and the rhythm of it seems to blend with the act of eating. For a moment, you sense the long chain of mornings past. Grandmothers feeding mothers, mothers feeding children, each breakfast stitched together by song and care. And then comes a curious little detail. Some households kept small pets, cats, dogs, even monkeys, that hovered eagerly around the morning meal. A child might break off a crumb for the family cat, giggling as it lapped beer or snatched fish. The act was playful, but also practical. Pets were guardians of the home, protectors of grain, and to feed them at breakfast was to keep balance in the household. You watch as a boy slips a crust to a kitten, its purr rising like another voice in the family chorus. But scholars still debate whether children in ancient Egypt were truly prioritized in meals, or whether their share was secondary to adult laborers. Did mothers shield their little ones from hunger, or did the weight of scarcity fall hardest on the smallest? Excavations reveal both. Children who grew strong, their bones solid with nourishment, and children whose growth bore the marks of lack. The uncertainty lingers, a quiet shadow over these cheerful courtyards. Still, as you sit among them, chewing bread softened in milk, sticky with fig juice, you sense the truth of the moment. These breakfasts are fragile but full, shaped by tenderness as much as by grain. They hold laughter, songs, scoldings, even charms whispered over garlic or honey. They carry Egypt forward, not with grandeur, but with the noisy, joyful resilience of children who eat, play, and run into the sun with crumbs still clinging to their lips. The courtyard empties slowly as chores call. Boys sent to fetch water, girls set to help at the loom, toddlers clinging to their mother's skirts. The remains of breakfast, crumbs on mats, a fig stem in the dust, the faint smell of garlic on small hands, linger like an afterimage. And in that lingering, you see Egypt's future mornings written plainly. For every child who swallowed a softened crust or licked honey from their fingers was one more thread woven into the long tapestry of survival. The laughter of children fades into the distance, leaving behind only the echoes of their noisy breakfasts. And now you step into a space where meals take on another kind of permanence. Not in fleeting bites or shared loaves, but in stone and pigment, etched into eternity. Tomb walls rise around you, their surfaces alive with colors that have outlasted centuries. And here, you see breakfast not as it was eaten, but as it was remembered, imagined, promised for the afterlife. The air is cool inside, heavy with stillness. Torchlight flickers, revealing rows of painted figures, servants frozen mid-step, bearing trays of bread, jugs of beer, baskets of fruit. The foods are familiar. Round loaves piled high, jars sealed with clay, onions strung in bunches, figs spilling from woven baskets. These are not feasts for festivals or luxuries for nobles only. They are the ordinary staples of mourning, chosen carefully to ensure the dead would never hunger in eternity. Even in the afterlife, Egyptians believed, breakfast mattered. You trace your hand along a panel where a man sits before a low table, his hands stretched toward offerings. On the table are bread loaves arranged in a neat pyramid, fish laid in rows, and a cup raised as if for beer. The detail is astonishing. You can almost smell the yeast, almost hear the crunch of scales as though someone had just finished preparing the fish. Artists captured not just food, but the feeling of fullness, abundance, as though eternity itself depended on being well fed from the very first bite of the day. And here's a striking little observation. Many tomb paintings show servants carrying geese, jars of wine, or platters of roasted meat. But always among these riches are the humbler foods: bread, beer, onions, figs. No matter how grand the household, the basic building blocks of breakfast never disappeared. Imagine a noble in the afterlife, surrounded by delicacies, still reaching for a loaf of bread or a jug of cloudy beer, the same staples eaten by peasants on earth. In paint, wealth and simplicity sit side by side. A priest depicted nearby holds a loaf in one hand and a jug in the other, his gesture formal, almost stiff. Yet you sense something intimate in it too, the acknowledgement that food was not only ritual, but comfort, to eat, to drink, to begin the day sustained. These were gifts not just for the living, but for the dead as well. The walls whisper this truth in every line of pigment. Food was continuity, the bridge between dawn and eternity. But scholars continue to puzzle over these scenes. Were they literal depictions of meals as they were eaten, or symbolic images meant to invoke abundance? Did the deceased truly expect to taste lentil mash and beer in the field of reeds? Or were these pictures metaphors for prosperity and balance? Some argue the detail is too exact not to be based on real breakfast tables. Others insist the art was ritual shorthand, more magic than memory. The debate lingers, unresolved, like the flicker of torchlight on paint. Still, as you stand before these walls, the uncertainty doesn't lessen their power. You see trays piled with loaves, and you imagine the smell of ovens at dawn. You see baskets brimming with figs, and you recall children laughing as juice stained their hands. You see jugs of beer, and you remember soldiers softening bread in cloudy brew. In this tomb, all of those mornings are preserved, not as fleeting hunger answered, but as eternal promise. Breakfast here is no longer a moment in time, it is forever. The further you walk into the tomb, the more the walls surround you with their painted abundance. Servants stride endlessly forward, carrying platters that will never tip, loaves that will never grow stale, jars that will never run dry. It is a breakfast without end, an eternal morning in which hunger has been banished. The silence of the chamber only deepens the effect. You feel as though the painted bread itself is enough to fill your belly if you gaze long enough. One panel catches your eye. A woman kneels before a table, her arms outstretched in offering. On the table rests a bowl of dates, their shapes rendered so carefully that you can almost feel the sticky skins beneath your fingers. Behind her, a servant carries onions strung in a braid, their bulbs exaggerated, oversized, as though to proclaim their importance. Even here, in the stillness of the afterlife, the Egyptians remembered the sting of onions at breakfast, the strength they believed those bites gave them for labor. It is a detail so earthy, so human, that it makes you smile in the half-light. Elsewhere, a painted child clutches a small loaf, holding it to his chest as though it were a treasure. You pause at this image, struck by its tenderness. Was it meant to depict a son bringing food to his father's tomb? Or was it a symbol of innocence, of the family's continuation? The scene leaves you wondering how much of these meals were memory, and how much were hope. Curiously, in some tombs, sculpted models were placed alongside the paintings. Tiny wooden figures grinding grain, baking loaves, brewing beer. Their hands are forever mid-motion, their faces frozen in quiet labor. These little workers ensured that bread and beer would appear fresh each morning for the deceased. Imagine waking every day in eternity with breakfast prepared, not by your own hand, but by figures carved to labor for you forever. It is at once comforting and haunting. And yet scholars still ask, how realistic were these depictions? Did they mirror daily practice? Or were they idealized visions meant to comfort both the living and the dead? Some argue the accuracy of loaves, jars, and fruits proves they reflected real meals, a kind of visual record of Egypt's cuisine. Others counter that the purpose was symbolic, that abundance was the message, not detail. Did the dead hope for the taste of lentils and garlic, or for the reassurance that they would never hunger? The debate endures, carved as deeply into scholarship as the hieroglyphs into these walls. Still, the effect on you is undeniable. You feel as though you are sitting at those painted tables, tearing bread from painted loaves, sipping beer from painted jugs, chewing onions sketched in ochre. The air is heavy, still, but in your mind, the chamber fills with the smells and sounds of morning, grinding stones, laughter, the hiss of baking loaves. The tomb does not feel dead at all, but alive with the memory of breakfast. As you step back into the brighter air, the images cling to you. They remind you that Egyptians did not only eat their mornings, they immortalized them. In paint, in wood, in stone. They ensured that the first meal of the day would echo beyond death, that no spirit would rise hungry, that no dawn in eternity would pass without bread, beer, fruit, and the hum of life restored. The air outside the tomb feels warmer, the sun higher, yet the images you've just seen cling to you, the painted loaves, the carved figures forever grinding grain. But as you walk further, you begin to notice another layer to Egypt's mornings, the stories that wove themselves through food, the myths that gave even the humblest bite of bread a brush with divinity. For the Egyptians, breakfast was not merely fuel for the body, it was stitched with the breath of the gods. In one tale, whispered along the Nile, honey itself was said to flow from the tears of Ra, the sun god. Imagine waking each morning, spreading sweetness across bread, and believing that you were tasting the sorrow of a deity, transformed into something golden. Children would lick honey from their fingers, sticky and grinning, while priests intoned prayers to Ra, acknowledging his tears even in sweetness. It turns a common flavor into something cosmic, each bite binding mortals to the skies above. Onions too, pungent and tear-inducing, found a place among the sacred. Their concentric rings were thought to mirror eternity, endless circles without beginning or end. Priests carried onions in rituals, offering them to Osiris, lord of the afterlife, as a symbol of rebirth. And so when a farmer bit into a raw onion at dawn, squinting through the sting, he was not only feeding his muscles, but also echoing the eternal cycle of life, death, and return. Breakfast was an act of theology as much as survival. There is a story of how the goddess Isis tricked Ra himself into revealing his secret name, crafting a serpent from earth and spittle, a tale bound with cunning and power. And yet, even here, food makes its entrance. Isis gathered herbs and honey for her son Horus, blending them into remedies believed to shield him from harm. Mothers echoed this myth in the mornings, stirring herbs into porridge, smearing honey on bread, whispering quiet prayers that their children too might be guarded by the goddess's love. Curiously, garlic, so strong on the tongue, so sharp in the belly, was also tied to magic. Some whispered it could drive away not only illness but spirits. Imagine a boy chewing a clove at breakfast, wincing at its heat, his mother insisting that Horus himself had been protected by such fiery gifts. The belief carried more weight than flavor, making each clove more than food. It was amulet, as well as sustenance. But here lies the question: how much of these beliefs were daily truths, and how much were ritual exaggerations? Did every farmer eating his onion at dawn think of Osiris, or was the link mostly preserved in temples and tales? Some scholars argue that Egyptians lived in constant awareness of the divine, that every bite was steeped in meaning. Others suggest ordinary mornings were too busy, too hungry for constant mythology, and that only priests and scribes consciously wove gods into their meals. Was breakfast always sacred, or was the sacredness layered on by those who recorded it? The answer flickers uncertainly, caught between myth and mortar. Still, as you chew a piece of bread smeared with honey, as you bite into an onion that makes your eyes water, you feel the stories pressing close. Every flavor carries echoes of gods: Ra in the honey, Osiris in the onion, Isis in the herbs. And you realize that breakfast was not only about filling stomachs, but about tethering each day to the divine, ensuring that even the simplest meal bound earth to sky. The myths stretch further still, winding their way into the folds of everyday life until it is hard to tell where food ends and faith begins. Imagine sitting at a table with a loaf of bread still warm from the oven, breaking it open, and believing that this very act mirrored Osiris's body being torn apart and reassembled, a promise of renewal hidden in a crust. Each bite was both ordinary and divine, nourishment and ritual, comfort and cosmic symbol. Figs, too, carried whispers of holiness. Their sweetness was linked to Hathor, goddess of joy and fertility. To taste a fig in the morning was not only to soothe hunger, but also to invite her blessing. Children biting into sticky fruit, laughing with syrup on their hands, might not have known the myth, but their mothers did, watching closely, perhaps offering a silent prayer that Hathor's abundance would carry into the day. The fruit was laughter disguised as food, myth disguised as sweetness. At times, breakfast itself seemed like a prayer disguised as habit. Bread was not just torn. It was offered, placed near household shrines where statues of ancestors or protective deities watched over the family. A woman might leave a crust beside a small clay figure, whispering thanks before handing the rest to her children. The act was brief, nearly invisible, but it carried centuries of belief. To feed the unseen was to ensure the living would never starve. A curious detail lingers in your mind. Honey, precious and rare, was sometimes applied not only to bread, but to the skin, believed to heal wounds or beautify the face. Imagine a woman dipping her finger into the same jar, smoothing honey across her cheek before smearing it across bread for her child. The jar, in that moment, becomes both cosmetic and kitchen, both charm and breakfast. You can almost taste the mingling of practicality and faith. The lines blurred so naturally that no one questioned them. But here too lies the debate. How much of this was lived belief, and how much was symbolic poetry preserved by priests and scribes? Did every bite of fig truly call Hathor to mind? Or was it only in hymns and rituals that these links were spoken aloud? Some scholars insist that the mythology saturated daily life so thoroughly that even the poorest farmer thought of Osiris when chewing bread. Others argue that only the educated or the devout layered such meanings onto meals, while most simply ate and worked, too weary for constant theology. The question remains unresolved, flickering like the flame of a temple lamp. Still, you sit with your own morning loaf, tear it open, and imagine gods in every crumb. The honey tastes like sunlight, Ra's tears sweetened into gold. The onion burns, Osiris's eternity ringing sharp in your mouth. The fig melts, Hathor's laughter softening the edges of hunger. And you realize that for the Egyptians, breakfast was never only about survival. It was about aligning the body with the cosmos, stitching each dawn to myth so tightly that even now, thousands of years later, the stories cling to the taste of bread and honey. The sun rises higher, the fields call, the temples open their gates. But here in the shadowed lane, with bread in your hand and stories in your ears, you feel how myth and meal intertwined. Breakfast was not just eaten, it was believed, and in that belief, Egypt found a way to make each dawn eternal. The myths still linger in your thoughts as you step once more into the rhythm of morning. But now the day itself presses forward. The sun has risen higher, the Nile's shimmer sharp and bright, and men and women move steadily toward the work that defines them. The fields call, the tombs demand labor, the boats await their crews, and yet, the echoes of breakfast cling to everyone. The last taste of bread, the faint sourness of beer on tongues, the sharp burn of onions breathed into the air. It is the first meal of the day, yes, but it is also the foundation of survival, the taste that fuels Egypt's eternal machinery. You walk with the workers leaving their homes, baskets of tools slung across shoulders. Their lips are still sticky from figs, their bellies full of lentils, their breath carrying garlic strong enough to announce them before they speak. They laugh, trade small jokes, wipe crumbs from their tunics, and fall into step along dusty roads. Children wave them off, still chewing their last crusts. Even the animals, goats tugging at reeds and donkeys stamping the ground, seem to carry the smell of grain and beer in their breath. Breakfast lingers in every breath of Egypt's morning. A mason wipes his mouth with the back of his hand, grins at his companion, and says that the onion he ate will make him strong enough to lift stones twice his size. His friend scoffs, holding up a garlic clove as proof that his own strength will last longer. The banter is light, but you can hear the truth in it. Belief in food was as strong as belief in gods, and both carried men through the blistering hours ahead. A fisherman on the Nile, already in his boat, still has crumbs on his lips. He dips an oar into the water, the boat sliding forward, his muscles fueled by the simple bread he swallowed hastily minutes ago. The river ripples, carrying both his craft and the remnants of his meal into the current. Even here, far from fields and ovens, breakfast is the hidden partner of every action. Here is a curious little glimpse. Many Egyptians carried small pouches tied at the waist, filled with leftover bread or dried chickpeas from breakfast. These served as both snack and safety net, ensuring that hunger at midday would not bite too hard. You watch as a woman tucks a crust into her pouch, tying it firmly, while her child slips a fig beside it. The pouch hangs like a quiet promise at her side, a reminder that breakfast could stretch itself into the hours ahead if carefully guarded. But scholars still wrestle with the question. Was this morning meal always sufficient, or was it more often too meager to sustain the back-breaking work that followed? Some argue that the combination of bread, beer, and onions was dense enough in calories to keep bodies fueled, explaining the endurance of Egyptian laborers. Others insist that many lived constantly on the edge of hunger, their breakfasts just enough to carry them, but never enough to leave them satisfied. The debate lingers, unanswered, between abundance and scarcity, resilience and deprivation. As the workers vanish into the fields, as boats glide deeper into the river, you remain for a moment, chewing the memory of their meals. Bread dry but filling, beer sour but steadying, onions sharp but believed to strengthen, figs sweet enough to bring joy. The taste of Egypt's mornings is not luxury but endurance, not spectacle but rhythm. And you realize that in every crumb lies the reason this civilization endured so long. It was built not on feasts, but on breakfasts, repeated endlessly, woven into the fabric of each dawn. The sun climbs higher, heat pressing against your shoulders. And still the traces of breakfast linger everywhere you look. In the fields, men bend to their plows, their breaths heavy with onion and garlic. In the workshops, stonecutters pause to sip from jugs of beer, their lips crusted with salt, their stomachs still carrying the weight of bread eaten at dawn. Along the riverbanks, women rinse clay bowls, brushing away the last smears of lentil mash, the faint sweetness of figs still on their hands. The day has begun, but its roots lie in the humble meals already consumed. Children, too, scatter into their tasks, chasing goats or carrying water jars. They lick honey from their fingers as they run, or chew at the last softened crumbs hidden in their pouches. Their laughter rings out, high and clear, carrying with it the residue of sweetness, the echo of breakfast that sustains even play. The elders sit in shaded corners, chewing slowly on what remains, savoring the comfort of food, while the world grows hotter around them. And yet, there is something deeply poignant in this cycle. Breakfast here is fleeting, bread gone within minutes, beer drained before the foam settles, figs devoured in sticky handfuls. But its impact is vast, its memory imprinted into every action that follows. Each block raised, each net cast, each line of ink drawn, owes its energy to the quiet, unremarkable bites swallowed in the first hour of the day. The foundation of empire was built not by feasts, but by breakfasts. Here's a curious reminder. Even in temples, where gods were honored with offerings, priests believed those same offerings nourished divine spirits in ways similar to how bread nourished mortals. A loaf laid before a statue in the cool morning was thought to be eaten in essence by the god, leaving only its husk for the priests to consume. In this way, breakfast was mirrored between worlds, mortal and divine alike sustained at dawn, each in their own form. But still, uncertainty lingers. Did the ordinary Egyptian feel this divine connection in every bite, or was it reserved for priests and scribes? Did most mornings blur into hunger and repetition, or did each one carry quiet sacredness? Historians argue both sides, and the truth may never be fixed. Perhaps breakfast was both, sometimes dull, sometimes blessed, always necessary. Now as you watch the land hum with work, you feel the story settling into its close. Bread, beer, onions, figs, garlic, lentils, humble foods that together built a civilization, that fed gods and mortals alike, that turned dawn into a bridge between survival and eternity. You taste them still, plain but powerful, and you understand that what carried Egypt across centuries was not only stone and river, but the simple rhythm of breakfast. And now, as the story settles, let the pace soften. The fields, so alive with shouts and labor, grow distant. The clatter of grinding stones, the laughter of children, even the sharp tang of onions on the morning breeze, all fade into a gentle hush. Imagine the Nile at dusk instead of dawn, its waters turned bronze by the setting sun, the air cooler, the bustle of the day receding. The urgency of breakfast is long past, replaced by the calm stretch of evening. You sit quietly at the riverbank, and the memory of bread lingers faintly on your tongue. Not the hard crusts of laborers, nor the honeyed cakes of nobles, just a simple loaf, soft, warm, familiar. It is enough. The river hums softly, frogs croak along its edges, and the world seems to breathe slower. The meals you have followed through this journey, the countless mornings across centuries, are all folded into one continuous rhythm. Dawn, work, dusk, rest, and you are part of it now, drifting gently into that timeless pattern. The stars begin to emerge, scattering across the sky like grains spilled from a jar. Above them, Ra's journey has ended for the day, his boat hidden beyond the horizon. Yet tomorrow he will rise again, and with him, another breakfast will be shared in kitchens, fields, and temples. You picture the ovens already cooling, ready to be stoked once more, the jars of beer fermenting quietly, the figs ripening in woven baskets. Even in stillness, the next morning is being prepared. As the air cools, your eyelids grow heavy. The smells of Egypt's mornings, smoke, grain, honey, garlic, fade into the background, leaving only a sense of comfort, of grounding. You feel your breathing slow, steady as the Nile's current. Whatever debates linger among historians, Whatever uncertainties remain in the fragments of tombs and texts, the truth is simple here. They ate, they worked, they lived, and they dreamed. And in tracing their breakfasts, you have touched their lives more intimately than through any monument of stone. So let yourself rest now. Let the last crumbs of bread dissolve into memory. Let the murmur of distant fields fade into silence. The story has carried you through dawn after dawn, through flavors sharp and sweet, through myth and labor, until now it has brought you to stillness. Egypt's mornings are eternal, but your own can now slip gently into night. Close your eyes. Imagine the Nile's cool breath on your skin, the hum of crickets in the reeds, the soft rustle of palm fronds swaying overhead. You are safe, you are steady, you are full. Sleep comes as easily as morning once came to Egypt.